pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. First item on the agenda is approving meeting minutes. We had a chance to review these from last week. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes of October 15th, 29th, November 5th, November 13th, and November 19th, 2018.
Second the motion.
Call for vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Start with public comment. Anybody come here with a public comment? Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. In South Barry, there are two places designated as common areas. Common areas.
Yeah.
One by Florence Hall, where everybody knows they march down there for Memorial Day. That's the common of South Barry. Was there forever. Barry Wool was there. They knocked it down. And they had another common, but they call it Narnay Park. They don't call it Narnay Common. They call it Park.
Yep.
And there's a sign right there that says park. Well, it's a park. That's where children play ball, games. One hoop, not hoops, thousands of hoops, just one hoop that could be given to the children to play. One, but little kids under 13. And Mr. Brewer said that if the money is the problem, he could help. You know that, I told you that in the letter. A basketball hoop, 4 people, 3 people would give the hoops. I'll use one. No, there won't be any charge there. So why can't the basketball hoop be there around the area above it? We don't want to use the inside, above it, or the side of it, which is Pine Tree Terrace. And they can be supervised by maybe the police, this guy, or the parents or the public or the South Barry Common people. So you have the wrong signage up there, I'm telling you. It says Narnay Park. On this piece of paper that was passed out to 115 people at the meeting and on the TV, my name's on the piece of paper, not signed, 17 times, common, common, common. Not park mentioned at all. The Barry seal is on it, and these flyers that get passed out in the summer, the Barry seal is on it. Narnay Park, Main Street, South Barry. Narnay Park. It says to go to the .com, and the Narnay Park, you can find it by going across the street to Needful Things. There's no such thing as Needful Things anymore. There's no store down there called Needful Things. You're not going to find a Narnay Park here. So I'm just saying. You gotta take the sign down. You gotta change it to the word park. You can call it whatever park you want. Narnay Common, Barry Wool Common, Lord Barnaby Common, Dandelions, Lady Slipper Common, Narnay Common. But you can't call it a park because you're not allowed to put things in that place for children. That's what a park is for. And you can't put it in there because it's gonna be destroyed, they say, because of protecting children.
For reference, the city of Worcester, right behind City Hall, has a common. It's called Common Park. And there are no children's stuff in there that they put there for normal use. They open up the ice rink in the winter and it's constantly managed when it's open. Other than that, it's not a place to bring kids. But it's called Common Park.
Park, exactly.
The use of, but there's no kids. There's no playground equipment. It's just open grass and places to sit.
That's where the
to enjoy the environment and the weather during the day. The use of the word park does not imply it's intended specifically for the use of children and playground equipment. It's a much more generically applied name, and using Nornay Park or Southbury Common and referring to the same place happened based on how history worked. My understanding is it was called Nornay Park because, if I remember right, when the Trifolos donated the land, they specifically requested it to be called Nornay Park. That's what was brought up by the Southbury Common Committee. Whether it was here or during an open meeting discussion, I recall that's what I was told. So the naming of it does not necessarily imply what can or can't go there. And we have a Southbury Common Committee that generally runs that site. Which means I am not one to ask them to change their position on their feelings of the use of that site, because they were appointed just for that purpose. And this is what they're recommending, and the town answered in that vote what they thought. So this isn't coming from the Board of Selectmen, it's coming from the town in the response to the request, and then the response to how Southbury Common Committee viewed it.
The Barry seal is up here. You go to the Board of Selectmen, the town of Barry, to find this Nornay Park, which is to be Nornay Common, because there's two commons down there. Because this letter has 17 words, common, 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 not any relation to a park. No word says park here. So common.
Regardless of the name of it, everybody at that meeting understood where we were talking about, the piece of land we were talking about, in the area we're talking about. The terminology, if you're trying to say, split a hair between park or common, what it is, we know what the land is, we know what it's used for, we know where it is. And people voted knowingly on what piece of land you're talking about putting a basketball court on, and their decision is done and final. If you'd like to start a petition, rename the park something else, go right ahead.
No, I don't.
Go
care
ahead,
what
Mary.
the first name is. I don't care what the first name is before the word, but it's common. It's a common place. It's not where you can put children's thing. The basketball hoop cannot be put there because it's a common.
Do you have a request?
It's a peaceful place and all that.
Do you have a request of all this?
I have a-
Excuse me.
I'm saying-
It's not a
No,
conversation
I'm
back
not-
and forth, so please.
I'm wondering if we have a request out of this, so we're
I
spending
understand.
more
Well, her
than.
request is to rename it,
Then
or
Let's put that in writing.
allow, well, this is something that should be presented in front of potentially two other committees. The Parks and Recs Committee that deals with parks, or the Southbury Common Committee that deals with that specific location. They both have authority over these type of things greater than we do. So I would recommend that if this is something that you believe based on how it's named makes a difference, you bring it to them. In the meantime, I would just ask Andrew to see if that parcel is actually separated by park and common space. To see if Nornay Park falls under the Parks and Recs jurisdiction, not the Southbury Common. Other than that, I really don't think it's the Board of Selectmen's position to do much more on this, but I'll let the other Board of Selectmen answer them for themselves. You?
I think one other thing we need to check on is the area where the big flagpole is by,
Right corner, back by the tracks.
In front of the Bradfords.
what?
In front of the Bradfords.
Bradford's is actually
Oh.
owned by the town. In my understanding, it's owned by the Barry Housing Authority.
Is that on the other side of the tracks between?
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't recall. All right.
If you're looking straight at the building, there's the trees and then it's the big flagpole.
Okay. You, sir.
Are we moving on, or are we still on that? Because
We're gonna close that up in just a sec, so I'll give you one last thing, Mary Jane.
5 people on the common committee. 2 of them live in Florida, 6 months in Massachusetts. The other 2 are, the other 3.
Are they voted or appointed?
Appointed.
Okay. Well, if other people want to be on that board, they need to apply, and at that point, when reappointment's up, we can consider whether the 6-month people should be removed because someone else is interested in taking the position. But until then, I don't see any reason why we ask them to leave because we have nobody else looking to do it. So we need people applying to be on that committee before we ask someone to leave, even though they are a 50-50 resident or whatever that rule is.
I'm not asking them to be dismissed from the committee.
What was the purpose of the comment?
5 people, you can't reach them, in other words, if you want to ask and make a petition or whatever, they're not going to be available 6 months of the year. And nobody signed this letter. Thank you, Mary Ann Gender and Southbury Common Committee, no signatures, and you have the Barry seal at the top with Southbury Common, and common repeated 17 times, not a word of park. And on these flyers that are around town, on the telephone poles, park, park.
I hear what you're saying, but I would say that there was no intent to deceive based on the way it was presented because Mary Ann Gender was at the town meeting and spoke up about this, so she wasn't hiding behind a name without a signature. So I personally am not overly worried about the signature part. She wasn't hiding, she was out front, she made her presence known. Her name was on this.
We could certainly discuss whether or not committees should be using the town seal on letters that they send out that don't go through us. I don't
Why?
know. I don't know if there's an issue with that or not.
They're an appointed committee, they represent the town for their jurisdiction.
They're-
I definitely don't want to get caught in every letter they're writing and figuring out whether it should or.
I don't know if letters from committees should be done on behalf of the town's letterhead, that's all, with our seal.
I get you.
That's all. Not that there's any repercussion for it, other than if, review whether or not we want to do that as practice and make a decision one way or the other. Maybe we do. But once again, committees are appointed, not elected, so there's a difference in the
Well, we
authority of what
have
they say.
greater jurisdiction over that, you're right.
That's all. I'd certainly look into that, and be willing to look into that and have a discussion on that another time when people want to have input on it.
Okay,
But
we
not-
can revisit this then.
Yeah, this is all relevant for later. We're getting kind of in-depth for a
got it.
non-posted article.
Go ahead.
Thank you for listening. Merry Christmas.
Same to you, Mary Jane.
Merry
Thank you,
Christmas.
and Merry Christmas to you. Go ahead, sir.
Two quick issues. One, I don't know whether you act on or have the authority for it. On Union Street, which we determined over here where I live, it's a one-way street
Mhm.
from east to west. When you round the corner from the police station here, there is only a sign that says, "Do not enter." So 50% of the time, you got delivery trucks, people who don't pay attention to GPS going down that way. I would request, if at all possible, we put a wrong way sign somewhere more prominent, because that one that's on the right-hand side by Don Valley's over here apparently doesn't get the attention of too many people. So I don't know whether that's within your purview or what.
So some kind of better signage of some type.
Could we just make note to put that on the DPW Commission agenda? It's DPW Highway Department's.
It's germane because, not because of me being a jerk, but because there's little kids that play out there in the street. They're used to looking one way.
Okay.
And, you know, and if cars are coming from behind, it's a spot. Okay, so that's one quick issue.
Okay.
The other has to do with Stetson. For a brief time, about 6 months, I drove, I was a monitor for a while, and then drove for van pool for Stetson and carried every day, 5 days a week, a group of Stetson guys. As time evolved, it was apparent to me that these were not just juvenile offenders. There were some kind of felonites in there, some, you know, whether this is breeding ground for felons or whatever. There were guys who had held a knife to their mother-in-law's or their stepmother's throat. There were threats that were levied, not against me because I'm big enough, but I've talked to other, at that time, monitors who had been threatened. Also, another fellow who worked for a period of time for Stetson echoed the thing that it seems as though, even though I don't know, and maybe it's a good time to talk about it, does their charter include or stop at a certain level of detainee or students or whatever, or is it carte blanche for?
This is my understanding of that situation. They are classified for a certain level of, let's just say,
Offenders?
offenders that need certain level of security and control, whether it's locked down or not, that type of thing. That's a fixed situation based on the state. The state says people can only get here based on their ability to live in an environment that isn't quite as contained as more of a lockdown facility because a violent crime actually occurred versus was threatened to occur, let's just say. But the problem there is it's a subjective decision based on what is supposedly objective criteria on determining if one of the youths fits into a certain category or the other. Now, how that gets determined and how that gets weighed has a lot of factors. Sometimes it's strictly, they do a really good job saying it's strictly based on the individual. But I also believe that government tends to say we don't have enough lockdown facilities, so they start to allow some of the decisions of the subjective classification of youth to drift into a less strict environment where they can now go to Stetson where prior maybe they couldn't because they don't have the facilities to manage it. These are things that I'm not saying are happening, but they are things where, depending on any major government thing, when they run out of resources, but they got laws locking them into certain places, they redefine how they fit them in to what they have for resources. Secondly, I think they've always had this classification ability, but until Seven Hills took over Stetson, they weren't looking to take on that, we'll use the word clientele or student population. I don't know how much the previous ownership actually wanted that. The new one came in and they're much more of a corporate approach. We do have some people there that I believe do care about the community that are working there, but they now work for a corporate, so they're not the final decision makers, so they have to do what they've inherited. My understanding is they've done a lot better trying to work with our public safety, at least to identify, based on generic classifications, whether certain individuals might fall into this category or that, but they can't give you they can't get very detailed based on public health, mental health record, disclosure laws.
No, I understand all that.
So they do have more, but I do believe they try to at least help bridge some of that gap over the last few months when they started working with our public safety, our fire chief, our police chief, to address some of those concerns. But my understanding is they're operating completely within the state's jurisdiction of who goes there is because the state says they can.
So, just to let you know that I'm not the only guy production on this issue. During the political season before the voting took place, we were going door to door and door to door. And probably 8 or 9 times people voiced concerns about seeing the kids milling around their house. And one in particular said he was looking in my windows and doing this kind of stuff. And so that then reminded me of Chief having talked about some sort of reimbursement process for time spent in helicopters and searching for these kids that ran away and whatever, I don't know. But anyway, I guess what you're saying is, I seem to be hearing that the oversight or review of the inhabitants of that place is outside of your world. There's no
We're somewhat locked out of it completely, yes.
And whose world, in our own residents here in Barry, who looks out for us, other than the corporation of Seven Hills? And
It's
I'm
the
not
corporation
angry,
and the state.
but I think
State
you should be
agencies,
angry.
there's 2 to 3 state
You should be
agencies,
angry.
correct?
Sir?
There are 2 to 3 state agencies that have jurisdiction over the use that get placed there, depending on who's placing them, is my understanding. They are the ones that are in place technically to protect the inhabitants of this town. But they're located in, I don't know what, Boston or something, and they work through certain inspection checks. I don't know how often those are. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm not even saying they're staffed appropriately for what they're been asked to do. But when we've looked into it and we've talked to even some attorneys that have told us that they've worked this before, but it's a challenge.
How long ago, if I may ask?
Less than 6 months.
Really?
Yeah. Less than 6 months ago, we spoke to an attorney that we've hired for our labor and our personnel type lawyer. And he had mentioned that for other towns, he's worked cases like this. He's familiar with all the laws, and he said, it's not easy. Even knowing it and walking it, it's not easy to make a difference in what's going on because of the way the state agencies are built and the various rules and regs that protect. The intent is to protect the youth, but there's not a lot of laws about protecting the neighborhood around where the youth is housed. So there's not much there to stand on saying, are you or are you not doing your job? So you get into a lot of subjective and like case law stuff to actually be able to make a difference that way. So what we've tried to do is just reach out to them locally and see if we can work on getting a better communication program. And I don't know how much more we can do. Tell you the truth, when it comes to the Stetson employees or the Seven Hills employees at Stetson, I think they're trying to do everything they can within the box they're allowed to work right now. That's the impression I got, is within the box being defined by state law and corporate directive. They're doing their best to work with our chief, is what I got. That's my understanding right now, but I don't think it's done. So we got to give it some more time to see if it's going to continue to work in a positive way that starts to create a certain level of comfort and security to the neighbors of that site. Because only time will tell. Like, we actually got to see less incidents, quicker response by Stetson notifying local police being able to do something, so not many people get to look through windows because they haven't been able to make it to the yard, rather than waiting 3 hours before calling. My understanding is they've made good progress with that. So if that helps, maybe it starts to make some headway.
One final question, and I will stop talking. Has the charter changed from free Seven Hills to now? Because it seemed like even in the time that I was involved, that the caliber of individuals I was carting around became scarier, for lack of a better term. I'm thinking, is this just, anyway.
The best answer I got to that is it possibly did, more specifically because the ownership of the business, Stetson Hills School, changed to Seven Hills.
Yep.
And so Seven Hills came with a lot more credentials and a broader range just as a corporate. And now all of a sudden, as long as the facility has the security requirements, Stetson Hills can bring in probably more people than the previous school could.
Yeah, that's a shame.
But I'm guessing. I'm not saying it is.
No, I don't.
But I could see that being an easy thing for them to do.
Thanks.
Do you guys have anything to add?
Of course. Some of the things you mentioned, especially people threatening the safety of others, those are criminal acts.
Yep.
And if those things aren't being reported to the police, which I get the impression from the surprised look on the chief's face, they're not. If they're not documented and reported, there's absolutely nothing more the chief can do about it. And if these things are occurring on a regular basis, these are the things that we need to have reported, because those are things we can bring back and talk to the management and talk to the state about for Seven Hills if this is happening. But just because you said they are, with no documentation, as far as anyone's concerned, they have not occurred. And as long as they have not occurred, we have nothing we can speak to the school about, nothing we can speak to the state about. So this is all what-if scenarios, but without documentation of any such events, as far as anyone has to be concerned, they did not occur.
I totally understand. It was in a social situation brought to me by two separate
I'm
women.
I'm just saying, unless they do something
Well,
and stand up for it and say something about it, nothing can change, because I can't take action on hearsay.
Yeah.
And certainly neither can the chief.
Ah.
And unless the proper complaint's made and sworn out legally, then nothing's gonna be investigated and nothing can be done. And if that's happening and Seven Hills doesn't know what's happening, how can they even help if they don't know what's happening?
Yeah.
They're not there. If that complaint gets made and the chief takes a complaint and brings it to us and brings it to Seven Hills, then they're aware there's a problem. Because Seven Hills isn't aware there's a problem with that either. And to be fair to them, how can they change their behavior when no one's made a complaint to them about it?
It might be a prudent thing, I don't know, but to talk to.
I'm just saying, it doesn't mean we have to go after Seven Hills for some behavior, but if we can't bring that issue legally to the police and bring that criminal type of behavior to Seven Hills to say we have concern, there's no way they're ever gonna change their policies or change anything, because they have no reason to. So if you look at their standpoint,
Yep.
how can they be expected to make this better for us and for their kids unless they know what's happening? If we hide it from them, there's nothing they're gonna do different, because they are completely unaware of the problem.
Maybe prudent to send somebody to talk to Vanpool, because they got, I can't count
It's
stars.
not-
And just tell them, if we, just let.
Encouraging the
But I'm
documentation
saying
of
it's
If
really
you
up to
say
those
nothing will
people, yeah,
happen.
and then now we're fishing for trouble, and I don't wanna do that either. People need to be responsible, and they need to be diligent and do the right thing. It's not always easy, but when it's done, then we can bring a complaint forward. And I would bet money that if those type of complaints came forward legally to Seven Hills, then they would help with that and take corrective action, because I don't believe for a second they want this stuff to go on. They're, I think, really unaware of that. We started off harshly speaking about them before and really upset them in the beginning, and that wasn't our intent. And I sure don't want to come across that way this time. The idea of making a criminal complaint is so that we have something logged and legitimate to talk to them about, and then they can look at how they can modify that behavior. But until it happens, there's really nothing we can do. And to say publicly about it will get more people upset that, all these threats are happening, and they get angry at Seven Hills, and they have no idea what's going on with that until it comes out. So we've got to try to be fair to them too. If we want them to be good neighbors, we need to be good neighbors to them. And we need to keep them informed of what their children are doing so that they have a chance to react to it. Just as any neighbor would, if some neighbor's kid was doing something wrong and you saw him all the time and never told the neighbor, how are they ever gonna correct the kid unless they find out about it, Maybe they'd tolerate the behavior, maybe they wouldn't. I mean, you gotta give them a chance to act, I think.
Sam?
Has the board ever spoken to any of the representatives like Goby and Berthew regarding some assistance in this area? It seems like if it's state related, maybe they could offer some suggestions, or maybe they could put some pressure in certain areas, because
Charlie can answer you.
we do, I'm guessing, we do spend a lot more police time, and we are not compensated for it. I think that's very important for us. We are a very wealthy town, taxes are going to increase, and if we have to spend, I don't know how much police time is spent there, but I think you need to quantify it and send them a bill, see what happens. I think that would be fun, personally.
We have different ideas of fun.
I think that would be really unique.
That
You
it would
Send them a
be.
bill for services. And I'm not joking either. All right? And put it in the newspaper and see what happens. What's the worst they'll do? They'll be embarrassed.
So you had a question, right? Did we ask
So
Donnie
the question
Berthhumer
was-
and Goby for assistance with
The
this
question
issue?
was, have we asked our representatives on that level to assist us and put some pressure on this organization so that we can get along better? That's all.
Yeah. Back in the late winter of this year, I attended a meeting along with Andrew. I think Chief Carbone was there, the deputy chief, and included in that, and met with people from Stetson and their government relations person or whatever he was. And included in the meeting with Representative Berthium and Ann Goby. They're very, very well aware of this situation. They were at the meeting, and I certainly, and it took a lot to get that meeting, as if you recall. They didn't want to meet with us, and they still haven't met with the board as a board. It was one individual on the board, and but we have met, and we have reached out to both Representative Berthium and Senator Goby. They're very well aware of this problem. And I think they've heard from a few people in town too about the problem. It's a difficult one, because we just can't say, you can't be here.
Well, so is this an ongoing conversation that we're trying to resolve, or are people just throwing their hands up and say, I don't know what to do next?
The answer to that is we actually have been making steps with Stetson to improve the communication, which was the hardest thing we had going prior to this last year. So Stetson has stepped up a little bit. Our chiefs have been able to both step in, and they've been working together, and our belief is it's improving. Again, I'm not saying that it's resolved, but it's improving. And we've just got to give it time to see if the improvement is requiring further assistance from higher level, or if it's just, as long as we're talking, we can find ways to improve it and continue to make it better. And I think right now we're still talking, so that's the positive. We weren't really talking prior to this.
That's always good. Thank you.
All right. Any more public comments? Okay, done with that. Just trying to see police chief employment contract. Is that the only reason you're here, chief?
Yes.
Is that it's just an open meeting item, right? Because we've already done all our. Okay, let's get that done and out of the way, so he doesn't have to hang out all night. Have you had a chance to review this, chief? The final? Okay.
So it's under the assumption that you had it.
Trust
I got
us.
it from
It's all set.
He said it was all set to sign, so I thought you had already reviewed it.
10% cut in pay,
You can just take
less
our word for that.
vacation.
Requested 20%.
I figured it's only fair for the town if you just.
Did you highlight all the changes?
I didn't highlight changes, that's just the final draft.
You want to move on to something else while I read it and get back to it?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And, yeah, if you think we're good, if you read it and think you just got more questions, you want to work through it, that's fine. You can just kind of say, and we'll push it to another meeting just to make sure we get it right.
All right.
Let's jump to the regional building agreement discussion. I would like to start with this. I brought it back up because I had received comments again from selectmen from 2 different towns regarding the specific issue of the agreement and how Barry is able to meet our annual reporting requirements and how we have or haven't paid attention to the actual time spent in each town to determine whether we needed to reevaluate the appropriations to each town. So for me, I'm still on we need to start actually recording the amount of hours spent in each town each day.
Number of inspections.
And, you know, at a minimum once a week that gets sent to you for the record. And that's that. It's that simple. And I would make a motion to include that into our our policy if necessary, or just see if we can make the motion to have where, when, and why hours are spent in each town, recorded in some type of record keeping. Whether it's office hours or based on strict permit matters not as much to me. I just want to know 2 hours were spent in New Braintree, and let me rephrase that. Was it office hours or was it permit related? And then where did they go from there? Where was the time spent? I don't think it's very difficult. I don't think it's asking a lot. It's just basic accountability. It's a large region. All towns are wondering who's where and how do I get a hold of them. At least that's what I'm hearing. It may not be the case as much from a town administrator's perspective, but the Board of Selectmen are hitting me up once every 2 months with questions about what are we going to do about this. The agreement, I didn't see a big difference in what you drafted versus what we already had in place outside of all the attachments. The wording was very similar. I know there was a couple things there that maybe I would ask you to kind of just clarify your differences.
So, I think the biggest one of the biggest differences that I was kind of going toward was mainly related to the general oversight. The way it is kind of right now, the agreement is kind of silent as to who kind of has that general oversight. It kind of touches on it, but it doesn't really give kind of fair and equal voice to the other towns involved in it. Basically, what my proposal is to create an oversight advisory committee on this. That's comprised of a member of each board of each town that would have that duty of getting feedback from each town and making sure that the inspection services that we were in contract for are actually being performed. And then if something comes up within a specific town, it can be brought to that forum, and then once that forum discusses it, decides whether or not it's an issue, they can either bring it directly to the inspector, myself, or the Barry Board of Selectmen for either discipline hearing or direct use or direct discipline proceedings. The other part was basically the outlining exactly what is required for reporting back to the towns. So that was under section 4J, where it says the town of Barry shall provide reports of each permit processed, each inspection performed within a certain period, certain date, including an element of permit tracking number, type of permit inspection, the outcome of the permit application, address of the subject property, the applicant's name and address, type of permit or inspection, the date the permit was issued or the inspection was performed, and any other data reasonably requested by each town, and then adding on to that reports shall be disseminated on a quarterly basis, and then outlining what those periods are, and no later than 30 days past the end of the quarter, so that way it's clear in the agreement what the reporting requirements are by the inspector, rather than just a report to be disseminated. This is the report, this is what's required, and this is the time frame that it's going to be given. I think that would give it a little bit more teeth as to what's expected, rather than just how come we're not getting reports. And this is sufficient, but this isn't.
Okay.
And then it just kind of gives additional requirements as far as what we're asking for the other towns. Provide us feedback on the services that are provided, so that way it's not a matter of, well, how come the town of Barry isn't doing anything about this? Well, you have a duty to let us know that there's an issue, not and what the specific issue is, not just, well, there's an issue that I heard about, you know? We
Yeah.
talk about hearsay and, well, I heard that this is an issue. I wanna know, you know, if we're gonna take action on something or ask for a specific issue, what is the issue? When did it happen? Why is, you know, what can we look at to try to resolve it type of thing, and just kind of putting that in place. So that was kind of the real goal of the additions to the, or the amendments to the agreement that I put forward.
All right. You guys have any thoughts on that?
No, that sounds reasonable, you know, getting everything about getting a better idea of where the time goes and the specific reports, like you said, it's issues we need to know, specifics and issues, like we said before, we can't act without having it brought forward. That all makes perfect sense.
Any thoughts?
Kind of, pretty much what Andrew stated.
Okay. Do we think we should be at a point now where we ask Andrew to take this draft and send it to the other boards of selectmen and town administrators to see if we want to meet together and finalize the revised?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, have them look at it, and then we ought to have a meeting, joint meeting, and we can all go over any comments and points everybody has all at once, and just one meeting, sit down and do it, and make revisions at the meeting that we can agree upon, and then circulate a final draft.
Yep.
So if they have a copy, and they look at it sometime in, you know, probably at the end of February, we could sit down together and look at it and make a final draft, I would think.
Okay. Okay.
That's reasonable enough time.
All right.
I would think 2 months' time.
So,
Let them circulate it and make their comments.
going back to my original point, though, I would like to make a motion that the building commissioner should start tracking the hours spent in each town on each day.
I'd be surprised if she doesn't in some way have that. I don't think she has her day.
We've requested and have not received it.
Really? Okay.
So, I would like to put that into a policy because apparently requesting hasn't resolved the issue. And so I'm making a motion
It's been our
that,
experience with issues there in the past, so I would agree.
she
Want
needs to
form the motion?
identify
Or would you like me to form the motion?
where she's been, how much time she spent, and what she was doing
Time card for the day.
primarily.
I would propose that we set up a policy that should apply to the building inspections departments, that for each day that they work, they produce a time card which breaks down what they did for that day.
Some type of, I'm okay with whether you want to call it a time card or just
It accounts for your whole day.
a
8
record,
hours.
but if they choose to do inspections on a Saturday or Sunday, then it means there's gotta be a Sunday to Saturday record that's consistently Sunday to Saturday. And somewhere between Sunday and Saturday, they show the full 38 hours that they get paid for, or 5 hours if it's the inspector. All that time should be accounted for.
Years ago, when I worked at Fort Devens, in a big shop there, and that's, every day we felt, it was not very difficult. At the end of the day, you feel like a time card. Whatever projects by job order you worked on and how many hours you put towards each project made up your 8-hour day. It's not difficult to do it daily. You try to think about the end of the week and you miss stuff. It's important that these things are done daily. And it's not very hard to say, yeah, from 8 to 10, I did inspections, I went to this place, this place, this place, and break down how many hours you did at each one. Or I did inspections in the town of Barry from 8 a.m. to 2 in the afternoon on this particular day. I did inspections, these are the 4 I did. And you don't have to break down which ones, but I was in Barry for inspections in this block of hours, and there's half a time card. And then I did an hour in New Braintree and 2 hours in the office here and whatever. It's pretty easy, I think, to do a daily card, to break up the hours. And yeah, if she does, 666 and then does hours on Saturday or something, whatever, and that makes up the week. I think that's a reasonable expectation to have put together to justify the hours and times, and that's gonna help us, to figure out the proportions for compensation in participation from all the towns, where the time is barely being spent, and then, when we redo this agreement, we can make sure that those allocations are justly and fairly.
So one thing we were looking at too is, operational efficiencies. So, like right now, the way the way that the or that the department's set up is that she has 4 separate emails in 4 separate towns that individual contractors in those towns are contacting. Also different phone numbers for each town that she'll leave a message here and then might forward to her email, or she'll have to, or somebody will have to get in contact with her. So one of the goals of the agreement is to try, or the proposal is to try to centralize that stuff to us, to say that she's gonna have one email address that will cover the 4-town district. She'll have one phone number that covers the 4-town district. Rather than just assigning to the building commissioner and the local inspector, saying the building commissioner and any other staff that may be required to support that position. So that way it's not, so that way if it's determined that an administrative role to serve the broader communities is required, then we have the authority to put that into a budget presented. So
Yeah,
that was
okay.
that was another part in here. I just
And that
wanted
makes
to let
sense,
you know.
because it gets quicker to the source when we
Mhm.
can do that.
Right.
And it just makes sense for everybody. So do we have was that a second on the
Well, we
track
need to-
your,
We need to define how we want to do it, and we'll be very specific, or we're not going to get any action again. That's why I was suggesting specifically that she start generating a time card for herself and the other inspectors as to their hours, each day to justify their hours, and it should be designated by town and task.
yep,
And that would be the motion, simple and straightforward.
and the only other thing is just, however it's done, whether it's done by hand or electronically, it's just gonna be legible.
Okay.
That'd be my, right now.
Okay.
And I would think we could say with these things, starting January 1st, shall be done on a weekly basis, give her some time to prepare, but there's no reason she can't come up with a method to think about the next 2 weeks and produce these. And that will give us January through, June to see where the time is being spent, which is a good block to look at before we make this agreement over.
So just to clean it up, I'll revise my motion, simply put this way. You do track the hours spent every day, identify the town and the task in which they're doing it, and the amount of time. Has to be legible. In the final format, I would defer to you as to what you believe you need in order to actually bring that all into one big picture over a 6-month or a 1-year period. This many hours are spent in each town. So you can develop that format for that reason.
All right. Sounds good.
I'll second that motion for the
Okay, and
reports.
I'm in favor.
All right, call for vote.
Aye.
Right.
And if you wanted to get
We
really
can
bold
just-
and generate a tablet for a table, and say she could use this table, that would be up to you.
This,
Give her a table.
Andrew, feel free to just start the process
Okay.
of
All right,
coordinating.
sounds
that.
good. I did ask them to, with the, I put in that little comment about the receivable, the town looking at, if we collected collected and just used that toward the overall cost. I'm still waiting on what the actual amounts were taken, or that were taken in by each town. I just think it might be a good indicator to really show what activity level is in each town as kind of a baseline. But again, if what's taken in is far exceeds the amount that we expend on the service, then it doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You could include in your table, if she's doing inspections, your permit numbers for those inspections, to
Yep.
find out
Mhm.
what's being spent
Yep.
by permit.
Yeah, that was.
You could spend 6 hours in one town on one permit.
Yeah.
And cover 3 in another, I don't know.
Okay.
All right. Are we all set with that topic for now? All right, we'll bring the chief back up.
The annual pay reductions were okay?
Yeah.
Any of the Board of Selectmen have any thoughts or comments?
Nope.
You good with what we got?
Yes, I am, thank you.
Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the new agreement between Town of Barry and Chief John Carbone.
I will second that.
Call for a vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much for coming, sir. We'll make sure
Thanks,
it
John.
gets signed and executed.
Thank you. You want to sign this? I got 2 originals on it. just in case.
Right here.
Yeah. I'll give you one of the originals too. So. Congratulations.
Excellent.
Okay. What I'd like to do is take the stuff that seems more of like administrative stuff that we're doing and push that to the end, and we'll move on to some of the things that I'm pretty sure some of the people in the crowd are here for. With that, I would like to review of all marijuana bylaws presented at the special town meeting. Start with that. What I would personally start with is the two main ones, the zoning bylaw and the licensing bylaw that were presented. I think I made myself pretty clear. I was disappointed in a minimum some of the zoning bylaw stuff regarding the number of licenses. I felt that when we attempted to work with the planning board and identified a licensing bylaw and a zoning bylaw, and we were trying to work together, we invited them into the host community agreement process, which we had no obligation to do whatsoever. We just thought this would be a nice way to help bring them in. We thought it might also help with some of the regulations they were writing into the zoning bylaw that many people thought were subjective. You kind of pull it out of the zoning bylaw and apply it more towards the host community agreement process as needed. So we thought that was working together, trying to get to a common goal. I didn't see much change in the restrictions that they were putting in. I saw some language change, but not necessarily a change in the restrictions. But then they put in limits on what they identify as site permits versus licenses, so I guess they could say the language wasn't the same. Which I didn't think was necessarily something that should be in a zoning bylaw, a limit to the number of permits you're gonna issue. If you're doing that, then there's no reason to put any restrictions anywhere else, because you blocked it in so many places, and then you blocked it in one last time, and you keep blocking it in. So I felt like, and maybe I wasn't very good at communicating to the planning board what I thought was going on, but I felt like when I asked them to remove that, just the number of site permits they wanted to provide, because we already had it written into the license bylaw, and they completely refused. I felt like they kind of took advantage of the fact that we were inviting them into our sphere, and when we just asked them to remove 3 lines, that they just refused. And I felt like, well, that wasn't really working with us. That wasn't trying to work together. That was just, thank you very much, sir, for showing up, but this is what we're going to provide, and that's what you get. And I thought that wasn't very reciprocal to. So it bothered me a lot. I'm just being honest. That bothered me a lot, and that's why I stood up on the town floor and said, there's a dividing line. And so I understand members of the town apparently had some issues with both laws. The licensing bylaw got tabled and didn't get pulled back up. Didn't get a lot of feedback on that at the time. We had some discussion, but not a lot of feedback really occurred. There was one item that I think the whole board agreed we could revise on that, and we're okay with that. And it gives us some time now to rethink and get some more public input on some of the clauses. Specifically, I think you brought up the one about the video and requiring them to participate in unannounced inspections was an issue also. I think we're more than willing to kind of work with that wording and revise that based on some input. The zoning bylaw was attempted to be tabled and it failed, and then it almost passed. But I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that from my perspective, but apparently the town, or at least those that showed up from the town, were pretty close to just moving forward with it. So that's where I'm at. I also know that a member of the town suggested that we create a whole new committee designed to help with all of this. I'm at the point where not only do I think that's a good idea, I think it's a take the two, give them to this committee and tell both of the existing committees and boards that created these to back off and let somebody else do it. And present drafts to us to tell us what they think we should do. Because it's been, is it a year and a half now? We've been going through the process of creating them. And I haven't really seen a lot of change in them. We just kind of keep hoping that they'll pass it this time. First time the licensing bylaw was presented, but still, I think that's where I'm going with it. So I've said my piece. I'll listen to what you guys have to say on it. Do you have something, Charlie?
Well, I was, I guess, on the opposite view. I knew there were some problems with the marijuana bylaw. That is the one that failed by one vote.
Yep.
And I thought we might be able to adopt it just, and then continue to work on it. And so at least we'd have something in place. That was my thought, as not as a member of the board, but as a voter.
Yep.
You know, that was the way I was looking at it, differently than your view, obviously, but that was the way I was looking at it. Now, the thing on the aspect of establishing a separate committee or commission or something to do it, Andrew, can we do that? Separate from the planning board and everything? That was my first thought. I'm not sure it's legal. It might be legal to set something up, but I'm not sure what type of authority they would have.
I think that they would have to that they'd have to serve an advisory role to both boards.
Okay.
And I think the difficulty that you'd have is getting the people to get onto that committee, get up to speed, provide the recommendations in enough time for both boards to be on board with those suggested corrections and present that before annual town meeting. Because that's gonna be that's when the end of the moratorium is gonna be, is just prior to town meeting, and you have 6 months to accomplish that. So whether or not that could be done, it might be tough. Or whether or not it's just a matter of the two boards getting back to the table and discussing it and coming to a consensus at the table. That might be, in an open public meeting with people invited in to chime in their 2 cents.
We've had many public meetings on it. The people that have wanted to have input have. I don't think forming a committee is going to change any of that. I don't think we're going to get any new input that way, and I don't think we have the time for it, as Andrew said. I think by the time we announce, accept applications for, and select a committee, try to bring them up to speed, probably most of which have no, background in writing bylaws, and they aren't understanding, quite possibly, how this has to pass through state and the confines that you have to stay in. I think it's a tough task to get into, especially when we are under the gun time-wise, and we don't even know if this moratorium will stick and may get kicked back by state yet. And quite frankly, I'd be shocked if it doesn't. After the time we've had to put it together and we have nothing on the books, I don't think that the state's going to be too pleased with that. I don't like the same thing you said, the few things they put back in. I think talking about numbers of licenses, it doesn't belong in there. I think it makes it more cumbersome than it has to be, and it should come out, and it should stay on the host side on our bylaws. And we give them a lot of room in the host agreement to work with us, and they can control the host agreement, whether it's approved or not, ultimately, because they'll have a more powerful vote than us the way we've proposed it. I would hope that we can have discussions and convince them to take those out, if they will be in place someplace else. And like I said, a lot of people worried about the proximity to buildings, the 100 to 300 foot, and as I proposed before to them, if we say that proximity shall be determined by looking at the proximity of those areas to current licensed alcohol sales stores, I think that will satisfy the state. Because now it's not just ambiguous. We're saying we're gonna make that distance separate for each one, but we're gonna base it on the distance they are, their proximity to alcohol sales. That means we're matching alcohol sales. We're not just picking a random number, but we're saying they're not gonna be necessarily any closer than an alcohol store. I think adding that phrase is very important to doing that. I don't want to blanket say 500 feet from everything. I like the ability to lessen it on some things. But if we don't tie that to alcohol sales, as we suggested, I can't see the state letting that ambiguous rule go through this open-ended like that. It's completely subjective, and most laws can't be subjective. There has to be some sort of finite determinant, so that if the state was ever called in to make a decision on it, they need a boundary to go by to say if it was valid or not. This doesn't have any boundaries. That's why I believe it's important to put that in there. Other than that, I was happy with the bylaws, and the town was pretty close to happy with it at the vote we were. I'll reiterate that I believe if we didn't have a moratorium on the ballot, that these laws would have passed. But there's enough people that would rather see the marijuana sales halted, that they'd rather vote from the moratorium to put it off another 6 months, which is what I believe why it happened and what was done. As far as our bylaws, I think they were pretty good. And striking that section, like, when are we gonna go inspect Dean's facility when it's up and running? The answer is never. We don't need that in there, and we already agreed to take that out, and I don't think we need a lot of changes to what we've written down. So I believe they're solid, and if we have some public hearings on it and people wanna have input, that's the time to do it. It's disappointing that this much effort has gone into it, this many meetings have happened over it, publicized meetings over this, and nobody says a word into the town meeting floor. That's disheartening, but that's what's happened. But I'm not willing to give it up to a committee.
All right, here's my, just a quick counter to that is a lot of these things were brought up in meetings and not instituted into a final draft. It wasn't the first time they heard these things. They just said, this is what I'm sticking with, and they left it in there. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm not trying to, but it's not like they didn't hear this. They said, this is what we're gonna present, and this is what we're gonna do. And they're representing the town. So I'm not saying that they didn't have a whole bunch of people telling them, stick to your guns versus another perspective. Secondly, though, when it comes to experience writing bylaws, I don't think it takes knowledge in writing bylaws to look at something and say, does that make sense? Does that seem to be overly burdensome? Does that fit based on, well, just general freedom? A person could say, hey,
Common sense.
what? Well, common sense, anything like that. We stood up, now 2 town meetings in a row. The zoning bylaw gets presented twice, and both times people stand up and start talking about inconsistencies, conflicts in between different paragraphs. These are things that just an editor would see, that you say it here, but then you say it there. And it's not the same. I think we all mentioned the thing about the outdoor cultivation thing. Almost every time we saw the draft, we brought up, you can't say it has to be within an enclosed building if you're allowing outdoor cultivation. We brought it up every time they said, here's the draft. And it stayed there all the way to the town floor. What I'm trying to say is another committee can look at that way and clean it up, because they're not thinking about what should be in it or out of it. They're just reading it and saying, this doesn't match this. We put out something saying, if you want to be on the committee, the committee's going to be anywhere from 3 to 7 people. It depends on how many apply. Send in your applications now. By the 2nd meeting in January, we're going to appoint no matter what. And by the 1st meeting in March, you got to give us everything you suggest we revise on this. And from March till April, both boards have to create a final so that May and June are just taking the final and processing it, not rewriting it the last 2 weeks, every week leading into it. We don't need to rewrite the thing. We've already done it for a year and a half. We need to clean it. We need to fix it. And I think right now, both boards have talked about it for a year and a half, and some of the things are consistently still there. And it's because the people that are looking at it have looked at it for so long, they keep missing the thing that is jumping out to someone that just looks at it, picks it up, reads it, and says, wait, paragraph E and paragraph F don't match.
You sound frustrated.
Well, I am, because
I get it.
that's why I'm saying it's,
I get it.
it doesn't matter what your bylaw history is. We're just asking for someone else to look at it and give us something in writing saying this is what we think you should do.
So what if we advertise for a bylaw review committee specifically to review the bylaw? Not bylaw committee to form it or write it, but a review committee
No.
to review and recommend.
To present drafts, it wasn't to present a final bylaw, but to say, hey, this is the issue, but I
Well-
want to bring in some of the people that came for this to hear what they have to say too.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Dean.
Thanks. So, one of the smartest people I ever knew in my life was from this town, this little town. Huge influence in my life. He used to have a saying. He said, trouble sometimes in some of these small towns is that they always think that the expert is in the next town over. With all due respect, Greg, when you're talking about you don't think there are people who can get up to speed, I assure you.
I didn't say I don't think there are people.
I assure you that you've got two here that know more about this than probably anybody. Meeker probably knows more about this than anybody. With regard to whether you call it a committee or whatever you call it, you know, now that we've been in this industry for a couple of years, moving through other cities and towns, almost every city or town we've been through, Fitchburg, Gloucester, Framingham, Marlborough, they all had a working group that worked with the planning board to take a look at this, maybe from a different angle. One of which would be a business angle, but at the other time, well, on the other hand, you could obviously have somebody like the chief or, you know, a representative who will look at it from public safety, from a legal angle. So that there are people here who probably would step up very quickly. The planning board's proposed bylaws, as proposed last week, first problem was that what was presented at the public hearings was a different document that was actually published in the book at the meeting. And that's problematic, because I'm guessing most of it was just grammatical changes, but that's hard to do, to review it word by word on the floor of the public meeting. So that change was a little bit tricky. Catherine,
That was supposed to be out at least 2 weeks before and not change from the 2 weeks prior, unfortunately.
And also to that point, when it was published, and it was published that you could get a copy downstairs, I went downstairs and there was no copy. So we had to wait for that. Catherine can probably talk to the legal issues that weren't consistent. I think your town bylaw was, for the most part, very, very good. I said that before, I really do. I think somebody put a lot of good work into that.
And we agreed on wiping out that whole section.
Why would you give up control of the HCA? You're three. You're three.
We were trying to
another 5.
bridge a gap to help work together.
Which I'm reconsidering after this.
This is a selectmen's issue. You're the elders of the town. You're the ones looking at this town, making these decisions. You
But
two should hold.
We also have seen in the past that there's some issues I think the select board in the past has had asserted a little bit too much authority on. And in some ways, we've been trying to rein in, reel back on, and harness the board's authority so they don't overstep at times. And this is partially an idea to that, and partially trying to get the planning board to work with us more in modifying their plan. But yeah, seeing that's unsuccessful, I was literally just considering that as to whether we should continue that with the HCA or take it back in our own control.
And you do have
If
control,
they're that
Mr.
difficult
Bruce, yeah.
if they're that difficult to deal with in this few grammatical things, it could be very problematic in trying to have agreements go through
And to
later.
Matt's point, we've been, as you know, we were the ones who first came up and brought this to the town. Not a
Yeah,
lot
you
has-
started it.
Yeah, thanks. Not a lot has changed, and we've been to these meetings, and there've been deaf ears. And it's almost like this document is very anti-business, you know. From the outside, had we not passed the bylaw, I would look at that as a business person and say, I'm not going there. I've got, there's so much subjectivity that gives this one board the authority to basically hold me up for months, if not a year plus, and cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in expert fees. And these are some of the things that, you know, Andrew had a bylaw that he's proposed that's 4 pages long. Fitchburg's bylaw is 4 pages long. So I guess there are people that would probably be willing to step up very quickly and say, listen, let's get this done, because it is in our best interest. We're speaking here as people who live in this town now. And the last thing we want to do is see this town get sued. And we also feel that maybe it would be a good thing if the town welcomed business responsibly. Thank you.
Anybody have any other thoughts? Yes, sir. Back there.
Just wondering if you do create an advisory committee, however, whatever level of authority you give them, it's been clear to me over the past 6 months of attending meetings, there are people who are extremely passionate on both sides of the issue. And those few people speak up a lot, and they make a big difference. How are you going to make sure that committee is balanced in terms of the people who are on it?
My opinion is I'm going to ask them to tell me if they have a one side or another side inclination. That's what I would like in the application, because I think that should be properly balanced. Plus, we do have a little history with some of them because they have been very vocal. So if they apply, we're going to know what they've been saying for a year and a half. So, and I don't mean that negatively. I'm not going to try to load this with one side or the other. I want a balanced committee because I still want to represent the town. But we need someone else to look at. Someone else with a different view, because I think people are getting lost at, you know, what is it? You can't see the forest for the trees, or vice versa here. It's, they can't see the words anymore because they're just looking at the whole document, and the words are making a difference right now. And I think you need someone that's going to take a look at it and say, you know, I understand what your intent is. You want certain protections here, but by writing it this way, here's an issue. But if you write it this way, you should be able to maintain your protection, but this shuts the door on a potential lawsuit concern, or this still allows for certain level of development in this town that the town really needs. But again, you can defer to the host community agreement to provide site-specific requirements that will help protect that neighborhood, because 90% of the concerns here is visual impact. Because if everything has to happen inside a building, you have nothing else except a visual impact, because we're not going to get Leicester. There's already going to be 10 to 20, 30 registered dispensaries open in the state before someone gets a license to operate in Barrie from the state, let alone from us. So you're not going to get thousands of people a day running into Barrie to go buy something. So what I'm talking about is the impact of traffic. It's not going to be Leicester. The impact on this town is going to be fairly minimal. What you're probably going to do is you're going to attract people from Barrie and people that live in our neighboring towns that live on our side of their town. I mean, you're not going to get a whole bunch of people from Phillipston, Templeton, Northern Hubbardson coming to us. They're going to go to Gardner. You know, so I mean, when you really think about it, if someone opens a dispensary in Barrie, they're focusing, I might have 5,000 people that are going to regularly want to come to this town to potentially buy something. And I'm not basing that on Barrie being 5,000, because we don't have 5,000 people that are legally allowed to buy. You know, we just have a total population of 5,000. So I'm saying, of the other towns around that are going to say, I'd rather go to Barrie than somewhere else, I think we're over exaggerating the impact on this town that we think it's gonna have. That's just my personal opinion. And I think we can mitigate that through the host community agreement in so many ways that we're over defining the zoning bylaw when every member on this Board of Selectmen is gonna be more accountable come election day based on host community agreement decision than any member on a planning board for a zoning bylaw.
That's true.
Zoning bylaw is gonna pass and everybody's gonna forget who was on the board the day it passed. But we make a mistake at a host community agreement, the town will turn the Board of Selectmen over in less than a year. We just did it 3 years ago, pretty much turned the whole board over because people didn't like decisions that were made. Who do you think is going to have the stronger impetus to try to represent the town properly? That's just my opinion. So that's where I'm coming from. This is me as a member of the town now. We've been asking for jobs. We've been asking for more revenue. We've been asking for, and the first thing that comes knocking on our door, we want to kick out as fast as possible and say, please don't come here. Well, you know, if you can tell me someone else knocking on that door or waiting in line, I'm all for it. But right now, nobody has told me that. Nobody has presented one thing where somebody says, I want to develop in this town. But this topic has. We've already got someone that's come before us, got a host community agreement, going through the provisional license or the license, the final licensing process. So they have the license now, they're gonna develop. It's gonna create a revenue, it's gonna create jobs. More jobs than a restaurant's gonna create. And I'm not knocking restaurants, but this town's not gonna survive on restaurants. It's not gonna fill in the revenue void we're looking at. So that's what I'm trying to bring up, and I just feel like when people complain about the taxes and then they complain about the lack of revenue and then they complain about the potential business, you're defining a box you can't fill. You've got to figure out what you're going to give in order to get. And right now, I don't think the town is very strongly connected on that, whether it's the Board of Selectmen versus the Planning Board, whether it's just town member versus town member. Everybody's got something to say where I need more money or I don't want to pay as much in taxes, but when we start offering, we could do this, we could do that, well, I don't want solar on our property. It's an eyesore. Well, what are we going to do? It's a payment in lieu of taxes potential, so we got revenue. If the town actually installed it on our own property, then not only do we get revenue, we potentially have other things going on there that we can work with. So solar's not a big, okay. Well, now marijuana's on the table. Well, I don't want marijuana. I'm okay if that's not what, but please bring something else to the table and tell me this is a viable option that we can invest in and move forward with. Because right now I haven't from anywhere. So that's my, as a member of the town, not sitting on the board, but as a member of the town, what are our other options? Other than just wait for the town to slowly continue to deteriorate, because we don't have the revenue to make sure we invest in the infrastructure to help make sure the town is here when we need it, and the roads and the sewer and the water and the cable and everything else is kept up so that when someone wants to invest, we don't have to figure out how to make it work for them and invest $100,000 to upgrade the road and the street so they can build their commercial property. You know, that's just where I'm at, because I don't think we're going to really take those next steps unless we look at it that way. And so there I am. I've said my piece.
So I just have 2 points. The first is with regard to the selectmen's bylaws. I thought that they were, looking at them, I thought they were fine. I didn't really see any big issues except a couple that Dean and Meeker had presented on the floor. I was really surprised that those didn't pass. And at the time, I really applauded the idea of having the planning board and the board of selectmen working together on the host agreements. I thought that was great because it would really kind of bring in the two entities and really make a fair agreement. At this point, I really think that that control should be with this board. Every other town that we've seen, the HCA's have been just through the Board of Selectmen and the City Council, Mayor's Office. And I just think that to have too many people involved, it's just gonna be a confused issue. I think it's better if it's just streamlined with your board. Secondly, with regard to what the gentleman said about having people that, people that showed up are passionate, you have definitely people on both sides of the aisle about that. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have somebody like Meeker who's vocal, but is also reasonable and super bright. So to have a couple people from different sides of the aisle, whether they're passionate and have been to the meetings and you know where they're coming from, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because those are the people that are interested in serving. So I'll just let you know. And I said only 2 points, but I have one more, Matt. As a business person coming in with these bylaws, I would never recommend to anybody that they try to cite something in this town the way these are written. I mean, there are seven items that require or allow the planning board to go and employ a third party to review any of this stuff. I think that's just overly burdensome to somebody coming into doing business. Yes, we want the town and the community to be protected, but I think there are other ways to do it. I think that just throws everything off and just makes it just incredibly costly to people doing business. And you do want to get business in here. You do want to improve the school system. You want the infrastructure.
Anybody else? Sam?
You spoke about being Leicester. I don't know if you all realize, but it's the only one in the entire state. People came from miles around. It was an oddity.
Yeah, one of two, but still. The other one was on the other side of the Quabbin, so not as easy to travel.
It was an oddity. It was the first thing. It was like Mickey Mouse coming to town or something like Santa Claus, and everybody's lining up for their presents. Now, it's going to clearly change on all these other facilities. And I agree with Dean that this town is kind of anti-business, but it doesn't really mean to be anti-business, is because this marijuana product is so fearful to some people. They don't know what to expect. And everybody's resisting what they don't know and what they imagine. I kind of question whether anybody ever went to Colorado after 2 or 3 years to see what it was really all about. I mean, we're just making decisions based on this little environment, this little tree-lined environment that we don't know what's happening outside. But as far as the regulations, they seem to be okay. They seem to be somewhat restrictive. But I didn't like this idea of unannounced inspections. It made me think of Big Brother, and I felt uncomfortable to live here to know that some business. So somebody some person halfway in the meeting said something like that. Why can't we treat these businesses just like liquor stores are treated now? I mean, I would really love to have been at this meeting when it was decided that prohibition was no longer legal. And we wouldn't be talking about marijuana, we'd be talking about liquor, however they made it, or the stills, and everybody would have their own still, and they couldn't have a still inside, but they could have it outside, and the fire department got involved because the stills would cause fire, so I would think that we ought to think back to maybe what had happened then and be a little bit more relaxed, because fear makes us unable to make sensible decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I've got to go, I don't feel
No,
very
go
well.
right ahead.
A quick anecdote. Last Thursday, I was at the State House for the Cannabis Control Commission's hearing, where they brought up our application for adult use. And their chief counsel went through it and said, caregiver patient connection. And he said, in Barre, Massachusetts. And one of the commissioners, Jennifer Flanagan, I think from Leominster, said, oh, no, that's Barre. That's one of the prettiest towns in central Massachusetts. And it made me proud. I just wanted to leave you guys.
Nice.
No, that's sweet. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night.
I just think that the one thing that's really, hurting the current bylaw, the way it was presented, is it's too burden, it's too much. It tries to throw 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. I think that any form that it takes really needs to be clear, concise, needs to go and actually kind of be clear as to what the objectives are, where the siting requirement is, what the process is going to be for the applicant that wants to do this. I think if it's clear, rather than having conflicting provisions and writing the same thing 5 or 6 times with different paragraph numbers and stuff in different areas, then I think it's got to be a little bit clearer to pass, because I just think there was a number of people who might have been really confused as to what the requirements on the floor were even asking.
You're in turn to the zoning or the general?
The zoning.
Zoning.
I know that the board itself doesn't have much to say over the zoning, but that's at least my take on it.
Actually, I have a lot to say on the zoning, and I'll explain in a minute.
I wrote my piece a few times to the planning board, just kind of giving them that heads up, or at least my view of it. But I just think that it's hard to regulate it if it's so cumbersome, or it's hard to understand what you're really regulating if you're going to make it extremely cumbersome to understand.
Well, here's a thought on, if Dean's confident that we're going to get participants knowledgeable and quick acting, and we can give them a couple months, I wouldn't be opposed to the committee. However, the zoning's it's none of our business. It's really, if there's going to be a committee, do we form it, or does the planning board have to form it? Because this is the planning board's bylaw. They can take what the committee says and throw it in the trash and do what they want anyways. So before we get too far in planning a committee, we got to see if they're receptive to it. Because
No, we don't.
well, we can make
They
it.
can just throw it in the trash, but we can still take it for what it's worth and get another group of people's opinions that are no longer the planning board or the board of selectmen.
Fair enough. I'm just
saying,
I'm just throwing a precursor out there that there's every chance that
you're
they
right.
may. I thought we may very, I think offering them controlling power on the final vote, we make the HCA, but giving them voting power on it was a nice extension and offer to get them to work with us, and they have not really worked with us on it. They haven't changed. They changed a few things, but not the other things that I think are pretty relevant. If something like that number of facilities has to be altered in their bylaw, then it has to be altered in our bylaw. And in both cases, any other articles that they touch have to be modified. And it just doubles it by having it in both bylaws. It should only be in one. I don't like the redundancy, and I think the numbers belongs here anyways. But fresh minds, people who can read it through, sure. But like you said, tight time constraints, so we have it back early enough to get something finalized and out there.
I got one more comment that I did bring up on the town meeting floor briefly, is the state identified the host community agreement and that it landed on the Board of Selectmen. Why the town needs a second special permit granting authority outside of just flat zoning bylaws, I don't understand. I do not understand why they need special permit granting authority when everything they're looking to consider is something we should be considering under the host community agreement. Personally, if I was the state, I would reject everything in the zoning bylaw that said special permit granting authority, because from the state's perspective, I'm saying the Board of Selectmen already have that authority.
True.
These should just be cut and dry zoning bylaws. Outside of going again to the zoning board of appeals in case you think it's too restrictive, it shouldn't be a planning board special permit granting authority. Again, we're not getting into too complex of a site assignment. This isn't a Board of Health site assignment thing, really. Mm-hmm. It's, I'm going to grow a field of marijuana, or I'm going to build a building and put marijuana in it and grow it, or I'm gonna build a building that's designed almost like a convenience store, but I'm selling marijuana. I just have to have more locks and security. And what I mean by that is, I'm building a building. I'm not building, now, testing labs, if you want to identify that, because maybe there's a little bit more chemical processing, whatever the byproducts through, maybe. But the zoning bylaw doesn't even speak about testing bylaws and special considerations. It barely speaks about delivery, other than it can happen. And those are the ones, if anything, it's the testing facility that I think has the greatest potential that might require the special permitting, because there's more where maybe you need a consultant to explain what this processing effort is and this testing does and this byproduct is and how it has to be stored and what's safe and what's not. But outside of that, I mean, I just think from my perspective, they kind of approach this as a standard way, like they did with solar, where they wanted the special permit granting authority because they were afraid it was going to get out of hand. But they totally missed the fact that there was already a mechanism in place written by the state saying the Board of Selectmen has that subjective authority. And so I'm taking this moment just to kind of say it. This is where I'm coming from. This is why I'm concerned, and I don't understand. And that's it. I don't understand. But with what you said, you had your hand up for a sec. Do you still?
Yeah, but I understand. It's a different topic.
Okay.
So I don't want to keep you there.
All right.
Because I think that's interesting what you're proposing.
I've got nothing more to say on this because it's just soapbox time now if I keep talking. So if anybody else has something even on a different line.
This is just something that I meant to ask at the town meeting, and you probably know the answer to this, but it's been driving me crazy. The zoning bylaws for marijuana reference a master plan or community development plan. Does Barry have one?
No,
Oh,
which was
that's a problem.
brought up.
Yeah. Here's another thing. Had we had a master plan, then both the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board would be pointing in the same direction as to how these should be written, but we don't.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, it's just, I'm sorry, it just goes to show that these need to be.
It was pointed out before.
I'm sorry?
It was pointed out before.
Oh, it was?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the many things.
Some of our internal reviews and kind of giving
Right.
feedback, it was brought up.
Let's do that.
You cite things that don't exist. Well, they plan to, so well, they should exist first. But that's nonetheless.
But I appreciate you bringing it up.
Okay. It was just making me crazy.
I'd forgotten all about that, but that was another conversation.
And I understand frustration's coming off. I'm sure what I'm saying sounds maybe more severe than it is. I really do think the planning board put a lot of time and effort in this. I'm not trying to say they didn't care. I'm not trying to say they didn't listen. We disagreed in the final outcome, and that's what I'm trying to say.
Maybe they'll welcome the committee.
But, and don't get me wrong, after April, we don't know who's going to be on either of these boards. So the town can do whatever they want in April to figure out if they like members that are in certain directions, and we may have a whole new draft because we have a whole new board. Well, one member of this board can change, but I don't know how many members of the planning board might be on the ballot. Nor am I suggesting you should vote people out. I'm just saying we don't know what's going to happen. But, or if people are going to want to stay on the board, they might just, I've done my best, I'm moving on, I can't stick around anymore. So, that's why I do believe we need to, if we're going to do this other subcommittee type thing, is they need to have responses back by March. So that
Make a proposal for what you want, and we'll make a motion on it.
make a proposal to appoint a marijuana bylaw review subcommittee, ranging anywhere from 3 to 7 people based on the number of applicants. And they work together. Open meeting law type concept, you gotta post meetings. But those that are applying need to think that you're not meeting once a month, you're meeting maybe once a week. Because you have to have all your comments and stuff on the draft bylaws that were presented at the special town meeting. Mark them up and send your recommendations on how to change them by 1 week prior to March 1st. Because I want the first meeting in March, whether it's a planning board or board of selectmen, whenever that lands, I want to have that in hand, so we're actually acting on it at our first meeting in March to see where we can go forward. And at that time, we can
So by the end of
accept
February.
whatever they do and just ask Andrew to revise the draft according to the comments, and let's go with it.
Thursday, the 28th would be the last business day, so end of February, the 28th, they'd have to have the conclusions in.
No, that's, oh, that is a fiscal
Yeah,
year
that's
calendar,
next
thank you,
part,
I
yeah.
was. Is
I
that?
was looking at that first, okay, they changed it, so I get that.
Okay, so our first meeting would be the 4th in March. So yeah, if they could have it in by February 28th, that gives us what we need to start our work in March,
Just
because
put that
I
on
want
the
to be
agenda.
done no later than the first meeting in May. I want our final.
They could actually
So
present,
there's a full month of the final there.
they could present on the meeting on March 4th. Send us their stuff on the 28th, and they could present to March 4th at the meeting.
Yeah, that works.
That would give us a chance to ask questions.
So send all their written stuff on the 28th and attend the March 4th meeting to discuss what they propose.
So applicant should seek the town administrator to
Yeah.
apply?
Apply through the town administrator's office or the website if it's set up for those type of applications.
And we'll make our
I'll let-
decisions.
Is it, people can apply for subcommittees through the website or just download the application?
I could do like a quick form for them to.
Oh, if you
Yeah,
can,
we'll
but
discuss some specifics of that after, but that's,
It's easier for
Said
people
there.
to just email me with that they're interested.
yeah.
that's fine. Email them if you're interested, just provide
Contact
some
them.
criteria, some basis of where you're coming from. Just something to say why, what you can offer. Maybe you actually have legal background, maybe you're just an editor, you know, I mean, there's, or you're just someone that thinks, you know, I'm not stupid, I can read something and provide comment based on what the town's been talking about. You know, that's fine too. I'm not looking for someone to say, I've proven I can do something, so I should be on this. I just want someone to say, I want to be on this and tell me why you think so. And we'll go through the process and appoint the people that we think are best fit for it.
So is our first meeting, it's not gonna be on the 1st, is it? We're gonna have it on the 8th of January? We're gonna, what are we gonna do for our first meeting? We're not gonna do it on New Year's Day, are we?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we wanna go 8th and 22nd on the January, guys? Good, second and fourth Monday? That still gives us another.
That or
off.
the 8th and the 14th and just stay to the, because.
Well, 8th and 15th, yeah. Do two in a
Oh,
row.
right, yeah, the 8th.
But since
Wait,
we have
no,
5 weeks.
normally it would be the 7th and the 21st.
So that's Sunday,
Anyway.
isn't it? Isn't that Sunday in the first? Oh, should be.
It's the 7th.
No, the 7th is a Monday. The flag is hiding Sunday.
Oh, okay.
So, right, the 7th and the
So I'm off.
15th would be the normal meeting dates. The 14th would be the
Okay, so the
DPW
31st.
commission.
Right, okay, so 7th would be normal. Okay, yeah, so we're fine to stay with normal. 7 and,
Yep.
7 and 21. What's 21 highlighted for?
That's a holiday. President's Day? MLK Day? MLK Day, the 21st.
So we'll
President's is a
bump to
February
22
thing.
or bump to
Couldn't
28?
see.
Bump to 22?
Yeah, bump that to the 22nd.
So if we had applicants in by the set before the 7th, we'd want them in to have the Friday before, which would be the 4th. Applicants in by January 4th to be considered?
It's up to him. If they're emailing it, I'm fine if you want to set a deadline of 10 a.m. that Monday. If it's just an email, you're just gathering it and putting it in a pile, right?
I'm basically saying, get it to me as soon as you can, because
We won't select
obviously,
it
I'm
till
gonna
January.
bring you guys what I got on the 4th.
Right.
I
And we
just don't
can't pick
know
them
what-
till then, so.
I can't guarantee that you'll, you know, that, 3 people, 7 people, 1 person, I don't know who's gonna reply, so.
So I'll
I'm
second
just
your
curious,
motion.
what works for your operations, say, on that Monday? Do you want everything in before you come in the office, so
I
you
can
don't have
have
to
it,
worry about
yeah.
straggler?
By 5 o'clock, I mean, I can print off what I have and walk into the meeting and go, these are the people I have, make a determination.
Let's set an application deadline via email or application 3 p.m.
Why don't we have them Friday so we can actually review some of those through email beforehand? And come in here a little better informed. Speed us up on Monday if he emails us all those applicants over the weekend. We have the weekend to go through them. So say Friday at 5. There's still plenty of time if they want to apply. They'll get 2 weeks.
You do realize he does not work Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, so you're actually
Thursday.
asking him to
I
work.
Thursday.
I'm just being honest, though. I mean,
still work.
you
I
do
just-
work, but that doesn't mean we should ask you to work. There's a difference.
Well, we could say
I
Thursday.
feel like I'm taking advantage of it when I
I
just
don't-
automatically assume you'll do something on Friday for us.
If people are
'cause
gonna
that's
come
not
forward
fair.
quickly, I don't think a couple extra days are gonna do much there. But it'll give us time to look at them a little bit, read what they say and why they want to be on it. Because if we do end up with 20 people and we have to take some time picking some.
It's probably 6 and 1/2. You know, I'm fine either way. So
Okay.
whatever the recommendation is.
we
I
can
have
do
a
it on the
question.
floor.
Yes, child.
Does the formation of this committee or commission or whatever you choose to call it preclude members, say, of this board or the planning board from being on it? Because I can see,
I would say that based on the number of applicants, they would be at the bottom of the list.
yeah,
So if we have 3 or more applicants that aren't on either of those boards, and then everybody on that board, I would recommend a 3-person committee that is not comprised of anybody of either board.
okay.
That would be my recommendation.
Because I could see I'm just thinking, kind of thinking aloud, but I've been listening to the debate and thinking about it, and I could see one political problem in that the planning board would say, well, we're duly elected by the town to basically do this job.
Right.
Yeah.
And I could see that.
And
I could
we're
see
not
their
forcing anything.
perspective. I could see us really upsetting them on this. And I'm not afraid to upset people, but I'm just thinking, try to avoid things, think ahead and avoid them if you
Right.
can.
But I think we're asking for, as has been presented, and I've been convinced since I sat here and said no earlier, a fresh perspective outside of these boards. Someone coming
Okay.
at it from a different angle, objectively looking at it and looking for conflicts and problems and making some recommendations. And the planning board will do what they want with those recommendations. We can't have any control over it, but we form a committee to give them some more input and they can do with it as they please, which may be nothing.
True.
They may welcome it, they may be glad they got
True.
some things they didn't think of, but they may just say, don't care. And that's up to them still. We're not trying to
Okay.
control what they do.
And,
I think we're clear about that. We're
I'm on the same page there. I'm not trying to say that I don't care what they think. What I'm trying to say is, this is the Board of Selectmen saying, the recommendation on town floor of somebody saying, create a study group, made sense.
It was well received.
I'm suggesting we do it,
Mhm.
and I'm hoping the planning board's open to listening to a different voice. It won't be us saying, you should do this or you should do that. They're gonna hear it from somebody else that is
Okay.
walking their own walk. We're not in their meeting either, jumping on them saying you should do this or that. We're letting them kinda, the study committee is gonna kinda do their own and then come to us and say, this is what we recommend.
Okay.
I can beat myself up in design of a project sometimes and spend hours and hours and hours and something's not quite right. And someone else looks at it and goes, oh, well, why don't you do this? It's like,
Right.
Because I've looked at it 1,000 times and haven't even thought of that once and I never will. And it's what it needed. And it may just need a different set of eyes coming at it from a different perspective. You know, everyone's kind of getting tunnel visioned over time here and trying to head towards the light at the end of the tunnel and just get there. it would be
Okay.
good to have some different perspective
Well, I
on it.
guess I'm willing to go along with it.
And I understand your point. I really don't
Yep.
want to step on their toes.
No, it's not about that, and that's why we stated
I
clearly,
agree.
this doesn't control them in any way. But, so I would second Matt's motion to create this committee as discussed.
Okay.
Call for vote.
Aye.
Aye.
So formed.
Alrighty. Any further discussion on anything marijuana bylaw related? Alright, we'll move on from that. The next one that I believe has more public comment would be starting with the Chapter 25 solar procurement item that I had requested to be on it. I wanted to review the possibility of using the Chapter 25 procurement method in identifying a process where we don't define all the details, so we can try to get someone to come in that would then work with us to identify the better option we might be able to use, and then we can always use a third-party consultant to help counter what's being presented at the table. But it's more of a kind of a request for qualifications on a request for proposal part. And then you can work through whether they suggest a lease, a PPA, municipally owned, or,
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
thank you very much
Good
for
night.
coming.
Happy holidays, thanks.
Happy holidays.
Say like Town Farm, that plot up there that has the cell tower. Well, if we put a solar up there, maybe we can then twist it into also providing power directly to the cell tower, so we create a power provider agreement to the owner of the tower, and now they're paying us directly for the power versus National Grid. And maybe all of a sudden we can provide a better rate than National Grid could if they so chose to disconnect themselves from the grid. Or because it's all on one parcel, it's a just behind the meter type installation, which would have to get into some funky little language because who owns what and what part, but they could be considered just a tenant inside a municipally owned parcel. And so what we've done is change the agreement where we take on the electric meter and we charge them a utility bill that's more just a lease agreement of electricity is covered, but this is what the tower people are gonna pay us. You know, I mean, so there's multiple layers of this that could play into it to actually see how the town could make sure we're getting funding that covers the necessary bonding costs, because right now we're also not in the best bond position. So bonding this is not easy, so you've got to factor in the higher costs we might have on interest and the number of years it might take, because National Grid's already also lost their SMART program because they're maxed out already. That's my understanding. Completely maxed out the SMART incentive program, so there's no money left unless Department of Public Utilities and whoever else, DOER, come together and say, hey, let's increase the minimum 16 megawatts of incentive blocks they wanted, because right now it sounds like that got eaten up in that first open application period. So there's a lot to find out if it's financially feasible, but we gotta figure out how much we can invest to find out if it's financially feasible. And so I brought this up to say, hey, what are our options? Is this something viable to look at? And is it truly, can it create enough to help to pay itself off? To include, we would have to review the potential maintenance over the next so many years, depending on who owns it, because it's not cheap.
I do think that, I mean, from my perspective, I think for the town to try to be the owner of a facility, my thought is that it might be beyond what our bonding capacity can withstand. I think if we're looking, you know, for what we're looking for as far as making, you know, to make some sort of money off of a solar project, our best bet would be to get into a lease agreement on the use of town land, and then to also have a pilot on top of that. So something along the lines of $15,000 per megawatt lease, plus $12,000 per megawatt pilot per year escalation of 2% on both. Because then, at that point, we're not putting the town's capital up, we're only taking that as a fee.
We're just accepting a bottom line fee to use our land.
Correct.
Right,
No matter how you write the contract, that's
I would-
really what it is.
I would question the legality of the town operating effectively a business.
What do you mean?
If we're, building solar to sell the electricity, we're running an electric company, basically. If we buy the panels to sell the electricity to people, we're conducting the electric business.
Only if we're selling to someone on another parcel. If it's on the same parcel, then it's not defined as a separate distribution company within the National Grid territory.
But still, it's getting into, effectively, it is running a sort of a small business, no matter how we call it, and are we really qualified to do that and getting into that? That's what we don't know, the resources, the repair work, the potentials down the road, like the companies that run them do.
The one thing that just kind of came to mind, I'm not sure what the, really the logistics on it are, but and I'm just aware of the initiative is this microgrid initiative that's been going on in the state, that there's certain towns that have kind of like looked at pilot programs of that, using either solar or wind or
combined heat power.
Yeah, or just as for the town to create its own microgrid within itself, so as more of a sustainability issue. I don't know any of the specifics on it, but at least that might be one thing to look at, is if the town was going to do something like that, whether or not it could just do it for its own, for its own uses. But that might be a significant investment for a little return.
I think the leasing option, as Andrew said, is probably a better idea. At least we have a finite contract for what we're gonna get in compensation, and the duration of time for that. So it's traceable, and it's use of the land, it's not selling our land. I think we definitely need to explore it, and we have a lot of land that could be up for this. I think it's worth exploring, but I don't know if I'd want to even consider the whole purchasing and maintaining end of it, because you got to clear snow off them, you got to do maintenance on whatever gets broken, you got to maintain the property, cut grass around them, maintain fencing to keep people out of it. There's a lot we'd have to take on to do to keep it going, which I just don't think we know enough about that business to get into it.
Yeah.
Got a 25 acre that it's my job to make sure the maintenance is taken care of. So I'm just saying I have familiarity with it. I don't want to say I'm an expert either. I don't mean it that way.
No, but it's just for the town to get into that and try to, someone's got to be in charge of it. It's like the transfer station discussion. Obviously, I'm familiar with trash. I picked up trash for 5 years. To me, that's a no-brainer, and it's a moneymaker. And I know that because I did that.
Mm-hmm.
But to translate it to personnel, I still don't think that's that difficult, but I would have no idea how to translate this to personnel and responsibilities for town people. Because who do we know in town that's going to maintain this that has that education?
I know someone.
Or do we have to give them education, or do we have to, what kind of compensation for it?
And I have seen where those inverters have caught fire and basically just wiped out 3/4 of the solar production. And word right out the guys, this is going to be a huge cost for us to fix. But they own the site. They had the capital. They did it. I can't see us if something like that happened.
That's a loss.
Basically, we just lose it and say we can't invest that. We're investing so much money to have it to start it. I can't see something happen. I invest more money to have to fix something that if it went wrong.
And that also depends on how we go about the potential of procuring this. So you use Chapter 25, you're also required to get a guarantee, which means every year you're going to make so much money based on the agreement, and, I mean, how you get the guarantee is its own thing, but a guarantee has to be there for 20 years for chapter 25. So if you're gonna commit with someone to build something or do something, and part of that says this is how you're gonna do it, there's a commitment. Now, the language in there about when is it the vendor or the contractor's responsibility whether we did or didn't meet the guarantee versus the owner's, that depends. That's negotiable. You gotta figure out how to determine that based on liabilities, and if it ends up being something that can fall into chapter 25 and still be a lease, now what it might be is guaranteed, this is what you're making, and the only thing that's gonna change that is what? And you've gotta determine, is it, can we prove that we did everything we could through the design and all of that so that the system wouldn't fail and prevent, meaning we, the contractor, meaning that the contractor's not responsible for a system going down and therefore they cannot make the payment that they committed to the town. Well, you've got to figure out where that language is in the contract that would be proposed and say, that only happens if you can show me all the maintenance records and everything you did to say you did what the manufacturer said and it still fell.
When you're talking about looking for the funds for this, is that something that would be funded completely through the chapter and through the grants, or is this something we have to still contribute on our own? I mean, obviously, if we can come up with funding for it that's paying for the lion's share of this, that's a different risk fact than.
It varies. A lot of times, chapter 25 might start with do an audit of such and such a site and tell us your recommendation on how to provide the best site with the best equipment for the best price so we can get the most money every year. I'm being very generic here. Obviously, you break it down more detailed. Once you award it to someone, now you got to sit down and actually say, how much is that worth? Now you negotiate the cost to present those options. And at that point, you get a number and you say, okay, the cost to present is this. They could say it's going to cost us $50,000 to go through all of this and develop all of the things and do all the engineering necessary to get to that level to say, this is what we can do for you and this is how much we can. Then we determine, is the $50,000 worth it if when you add that in, they're saying, and this should present you a range of this to this every year annually. And then all of a sudden they're saying, well, you're going to make $20,000 a year if you put in the $50,000 now. So in 3 years you paid off, and then you got 17 more years of a minimum of $20,000 that you didn't have before. And I'm just making up numbers here. The numbers could be 10 times that or less. But that's how the process that I've walked. There was no upfront money. The money was after you award, you sit down and negotiate the efforts to take the first steps in the RFP, RFQ you had posted, which is the audit, which then presents something like a 30% design saying we can do this for you at this cost moving forward. And at that point you determine if you want to make the investment, or again, if it's a lease, you just want to commit to the contract and let them go with it. Now, that's the experience I've had with it. I'm sure there's multiple ways Chapter 25 can be applied. There's like 4 different sub-paragraphs depending on which choice you want to make. And of course there's a million, like, what do you call it, like template contracts out there now that you can just go and ask, and it's like, use this to build your contract if you want to do this. I think if we believe leasing is the way, I think you can skip chapter 25 and go to chapter 39M or something. It's normally used for parks and DPW stuff for horizontal construction. But leasing a property for solar is very similar. So I think they allow you to use that method. I forget what the benefit to that is over chapter 30, but there's some benefit. It might be very similar to an RFQ process. I don't recall.
I think that's the process that we use, 3039M.
Okay.
In my previous experience.
So this agenda item saying chapter 25 was just where I was coming from, but I don't want to say just chapter 25. I want us to look at what we think would be the best to present.
I think it's definitely worth looking into, and I lean it'd be hard to convince me, I think, off of lease, just because getting into the ownership and run of it and the risk is too daunting. It's easier to get, I think in this case, you know, don't regret someone else, their profit and their business end of it. And having a cutoff of that is better than trying to take the whole share on and get into something we're not, I don't think, prepared to do. But I think there's still good potential for leasing. I believe there is, and if that means getting the chapter 25 or 39 or 30 to get, you know, this estimated and proposed and drawn up, then it's worth it. You know?
Try to get something to you guys.
And we might, if we can get to that rough draft of the RFP, RFQ, just add energy storage into the language so we can figure out, just so it's not excluded from the request, and then we can talk to them about more of that. Yes, sir.
I had a feeling that this was going to be one of the conversations tonight, and I took the liberty of just doing a quick search on the web about what's happened in Massachusetts. Actually, 3 in Massachusetts and 1 out of state. So I took the liberty of making some copies of things that might jar your thoughts a little bit differently than maybe what you're saying, and I just thought I'd want to share it with the board. I only made 1 copy of each, so you might have to.
Oh, I gotcha.
You might have to share it, but there's a lot going on in Massachusetts. There's a lot going on in Massachusetts that we may not necessarily know about, and
Sandy, you want to make sure you get one for Andrew too?
and I like the idea of monies
back with 3
to
just in case.
investigate this in chapter 3, and I didn't know anything about all these chapters. That's your guys' jobs. So, but I'm glad it came up, and if I could participate in any way with information or ideas or thoughts, I follow this pretty regularly because I have other properties in other states that I pay attention to. So I like to know what my neighbor is doing, and I like to know what's happening in, for instance, Illinois, because I look at that and I say, wow, what a good idea. And then it starts clicking, and then it becomes Barry in Massachusetts opened a co-op or something.
Yeah.
So anyways, I brought it to your attention, so thank you for bringing it up. That's really appreciated.
Appreciate the input.
And I appreciate it. And that's one of the other things too, is they open the door more for the concept of community solar, where you can create a solar array, but various members of the community can actually invest privately into a percentage, and then they get a percentage of the revenue for making that investment. And that's been much more better detailed how that can happen with the current regulations. I think they really did a good job explaining how that method is set up and what they require for you to actually show you did it. And so I'm not saying that's for us, but maybe this process may reveal it's an option, because now we're not committing the whole town to funds. We're saying, we're looking to do this, anybody interested, file by such and such a date. Now we have a total number of people that are willing to commit a certain whatever.
You could find out that there's double the funding we need and there's a big demand for this, and then we could own the facilities and insure the facilities and do that. But that's, once again, there's going to be maintenance and personnel for that and a lot more details to get down that road. But I certainly understand the idea of it.
Well, it also helps when you get a town full of, I don't want solar everywhere. You put solar in one spot that nobody sees regularly, and everybody else shares in the investment and then the revenue that want to invest in solar. So you can, like, if even the Kukases privately wanted to do it in some deep acreage that nobody's going to see, but all of a sudden the funding doesn't seem to work, he talks to everybody else, and all of a sudden you got 50 people willing to invest in a certain amount, and all of a sudden they're all getting a little bit of the benefit they needed to make the difference in their income to cost livelihood right now.
Mhm.
So that's the difficult part with the solar part, is they can't move forward with those projects until they've committed all the power that they're going to generate. So it's not just, we're gonna generate this and it's all gonna dump it to the grid and it's gonna go wherever. They basically need to identify a purchaser of all that electricity before that project ever gets off the ground. They need to sign power purchase agreements. That's like with the town, with that, you know, that we're in the Iron Horse
Yeah.
solar agreement. We signed that agreement probably 2 years ago, but didn't actually come online until about a year, because they needed that commitment from all the stakeholders involved that, yes, we will purchase that energy for the next 30 years. So we know that when we build this, it's gonna go somewhere. So
Right.
it kind of falls on the contractor too to say, yeah, I've identified where this electricity is going, so I feel confident in making this investment.
That's where energy storage comes in too, though.
Exactly.
Because now it doesn't necessarily all have to go at once.
Mhm.
What you can do is you use energy storage to tell the national grid you're gonna get the same amount all the time, no matter what from us.
There's no new projects coming online, because just remember, field like phone calls for days. Hi, I'd like to talk to you about your energy usage. All set, thank you very much. You're in a power purchase agreement? Yes, I am. So
Right, exactly.
everybody's calling around to every large scale user to see how much capacity do you have left over, so that way we can sell you some more electricity. So.
And if you can, well, we'll get to it another day. I don't wanna keep belaboring that point. So I think it's worth taking another step, so we'll, revisit this probably at each meeting a little bit, just to figure out where our progress is and just keep going until we can figure out what to do. With that, I believe this somewhat comes from you, Greg, initially, the Springtown Common event? Or was it just you brought it up and
Just-
someone else put it on the agenda because they have something in response?
I put it on
He
there
put it
just
on.
because you said you had asked for it
Interested
to be on the
in
next
talking
meeting.
about it. After we had the Santa parade uptown, just talking with Andrew, talking to some other people, there seems to be some enthusiasm to see something happen on the Common in the spring. And my thoughts were, and I had it before and kind of got a little deeper into it, maybe reach out to the local greenhouses and local farmers and see, and maybe they talk about selling starter plants, be they flowers in baskets or tomato plants and cucumber and squash, and try to set an event up, whether it's just for a weekend, a whole weekend, or maybe do a couple things during the week. Maybe we could get people that are willing to put in some how-to seminars for, you know, where to plant, what kind of sun, light, soil, growing times, growing temperatures, you know, what plants go near each other, how much space they need. Give some people for their own local gardens, you know, someone could be up there selling raised bed gardens, for goodness sakes, and, you know, put a couple up for demonstration and sell them to people. But there's a lot of possibility, and I think if it was publicized well enough, we did something like that, and probably, I would think, what, April, May time would be probably right for around here? You know better the front.
Last week of April, first week of May.
So, around that time frame.
That's kind of the early time.
It's kind of like
Plants
the
really go
farmer's
in the ground
market
that
opening
third-
is very similar to that, right?
The second,
Just before Mother's Day.
Yeah, so people
Yeah,
might
I like
wanna,
that.
you know, pre-purchase
Second week in
plants.
May, right?
Yeah.
They could buy their plants, get their ideas ready, take them home and start seedlings, or grow them at home indoors for a little bit. They could buy starter plants and keep going in buckets till they're ready, but get the information they need so they're ready. And if we advertise this well enough, this could be a big draw from a lot of local communities. No one's doing anything like this that I know of around anywhere. And it'd be potential to have a really good event in the Common, bring a lot of people in. You know, and during that, if we're gonna do that, we could try to get some vendors out there. You know, you could have a farmer's market out there still with cookies and other things that the farmer's market typically sell in the spring. People that still have honey and homemade goods and crafts and things. We might get some vendors in for, who knows, cotton candy or candy apples and whatever. And try to get some vendors out there as well. And make a big day for it in the spring and try to use the Common more. And draw the community together, which has always been what I think one of the goals we really need to do is get the community back together more. And this would be a good way to do it. I think people would welcome the event. And just a matter of, if we want to do it, how do we want to focus and how do we want to go after it? I think, you know, talking to local farms and greenhouses, especially if they would be willing to come out and maybe do some seminars and look to sell starter plants.
I like it.
And, you know, if local greenhouses, and depending what we need, if we can handle it there, maybe we need to go outside and get another local community to bring stuff in too from greenhouses. We don't need to say just local, but it'd be nice to get something for the local greenhouses and help the local farms, you know, by doing it local only if we could, and then bring vendors in for, to make it a bigger event.
I have a question. Fits along the lines with this a little bit, but it also fits in line with some of the things you've been talking about for the, what, 2025, is it? 2024, the,
Yeah, all the.
big anniversary?
250th.
250, is it? Should we look at trying to develop something that's specific to town-sponsored event coordination, like a committee for that? There's a couple reasons I'm bringing it up. One is they can help us do this. They're, you know, we assign them, okay, Springtown Common event, that's your job. No later than February, we need, this is what we're gonna do, because we gotta get it out there, so by May 1st, it's like not just at the last minute someone saying, oh, can you make it too? Like, we actually get it going.
Well, yeah, the
And now the
greenhouses
first
need to
one,
know
because
soon.
we're almost in January, this first spring might not be the vision we have of it,
No,
but that same committee will stay there and learn from it, and the next year improve on it. But then we can ask them, hey, while you're doing that, we got some huge event coming in 2025 that you fill in the gaps with. So you're not just a random, just show up once, like every month you're meeting because you're doing an event services. And the reason I bring that up is Hubbardston hired technically a volunteer. At least that's what they said at one of these QEMP meetings, that pretty much organized their entire 250th anniversary, whatever they had this last year. And after she did it, she proposed to the town that she liked it or something, and then they came to an agreement where she's doing that kind of for free for them for all their big events. Like, she's just trying to, and she's still working with, but she's now a member of the town government per se that's working with all the other volunteers. But that was something that was brought up where not only that, but you can work with Hubbardston now. This committee can work with Hubbardston. They can work with New Braintree if they got people like that, Hardwick. So when there's a big regional event somebody wants to do, you make sure it doesn't happen when somebody in another town's doing the same thing that week. And you start coordinating the region, and there was something we talked about, but in order to get real regional coordination, you need to have your own local coordination that isn't just everybody coming up with an idea and going with it, and then we come back and we find out Felton Field's doing something, but we weren't really aware of it because we're just not into their thing unless you're tracking their own calendar of events. Or is the Southbury Common doing something? Well, we don't know unless you're tracking just there's no centralized events going on in town that each different committee or Parks and Recs committee is.
right, it's just right here on either ends of the table.
But this could be bringing it together, helping maintain a calendar of events that end up on the website saying, Felton Field's doing this, Southbury Common's doing this. We have 4 major events we do every year. This is going to happen there, this is going to happen there. It may be a way where the town gets a little bit more involved with what's going on in Christmas and Barry, if we want to. Again, I'm a big proponent of the privatization of that.
I believe this is where.
Because it's a much easier, hands-off.
This is where we got in hot water a year ago, but the idea is sound, and it was a year ago as well.
But I just mean still someone can say, hey, this is what we're doing, and this committee that I'm suggesting we develop just helps keep Andrew in the loop so he's not chasing it as much.
So maybe instead of saying.
Or just getting hit by it.
Before you proposed a Barry Common committee that would oversee all the events in the Common, and we talked about the Christmas, and this is where that all blew up on us. Maybe we just have a Barry Events Committee.
That's where I'm getting at. So again, we're not trying to take over anybody's role or rule. We're trying to bring it together so everybody knows what's going on. And plus, it's a standing committee. You can now look at these every 5 or 10 years. You got something big coming. Well, you can ask them now in 5 years. Like in 2 years, we need the capital plan. In 4 years, we need this plan. You know what? Whatever it is. We're going to want to do a parade route here. Well, maybe we want to make sure DPW knows 2 years in advance we should be paving that road.
Rare input over here.
Do you want that as a volunteer or an appointed committee? Because some people like to volunteer and do things, but they don't necessarily want to be committed. They may want to help 1 year and then the next year not have to be.
I would think we need a appointed committee head, so someone that does report to us.
That's more what I think. Either 1, 2, or 3 appointed people, but then they can bring as many volunteers into the role and participate and kind of keep track of those members. Very similar, I guess, how the youth commission does it.
Yeah.
You know, they track the volunteers and when necessary go through the core reports on that, but there's really 3 people I think that are appointed.
But some members would need to be, you know, so we'd have to have some
Even though it's
accountability
one
so we
time,
can talk
so-
to them and get updates and have some sort, because the idea is, as Matt's saying, is to have some sort of official town entity involved in this,
Right.
which gives us the ability to talk to other towns and link and communicate through a person that's designated to do that. So I think we need some sort of official, but absolutely volunteers, why not?
So we got to work on creating a draft for that charge, just because, again, I don't want to overburden it, but I want to make sure we draft out what we think they really should be doing and what we're hoping they would want to do.
I think this is one committee we may get some volunteers for.
I hope so.
I think people are interested in that and would like to be involved in that. Just walking around after the parade, I talked to a few people about it, a lot of different people about it, and people seem excited about the idea. They love seeing the common used again, you know. You know, everyone loves Halloween out there. There's no reason we shouldn't be out in this common 4 times, 5 times a year doing events, you know, and trying to make things go on here and get the community back involved, you know.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll start with getting a Berry Events Committee draft, and we'll work through that process. But hopefully, we can clean it up and be ready mid-January or the first week in February to really try to get it out and say, please start applying, this is what we're asking you to do.
In the meantime,
And
maybe talk to some local,
just start networking now to see who might do something in
but
the
talk to
spring
some of
and
the
then bring it.
greenhouses and see, and we
Right.
have one right up the street here. And what's the other one on, Spring Hill Road? Is it Hartman's? There's a couple in greenhouses in town that may want to go, and I don't know, I assume you really need greenhouse to grow starter plants like that in bulk, and I don't know how many they'll produce, or how many we'd sell. You could have 100 people show, you could have 1,000 people come through on a nice weekend and show up and want to buy plants. You just don't know what you're gonna get. But if, you know, if we had some way to let them sell plants all week, that would be good too, or if we had some use of the town hall for maybe the seminars they want to put on. So rain or shine, they could put on this grow seminars about soil content, location of plants, proximity to other plants, how to build a, you know, a planter box above ground. I mean, people don't realize you can sit on asphalt or concrete, I don't care where you are, and build with, out of 2x12s, a box, fill it with some crushed stone and the proper soils and peat moss on that, and have a nice above ground garden contained on asphalt. You don't need to have, you know, everything. You just have to have the right drainage set up and the right soil into it. And anybody can make a small garden from, you know, literally I've seen tomatoes in a bucket and they're hanging upside down, or tomatoes in a 5-gallon bucket that produce tremendous amounts. I mean, you would be amazed at the cherry tomatoes you get out of one plant in a bucket. That anyone can make some use of gardening and enjoy it and get a return on it. And I don't think people understand how easy it is sometimes. Now, if you want to do a big garden, there's a lot more involved, and they could talk about that too, but to have
this
a
is
couple
something to add
plants.
to what the event's about.
Right, and it would certainly, that's fitting for our community, being a farming community anyways, to do something like this in the common as well, because that's a fitting thing, I think, for this town. And, you know, maybe someday we talk about livestock in, you know, whether it's sheep, people talk, you're not gonna bring
And
cows in the
maybe we'll
common,
get
but.
a local school to talk about teaching people this stuff.
Yeah, well, or we could have you never know if farms wanna put on something and do something in conjunction with.
Okay.
Visit farms in a different week and learn about alpacas, or learn about sheep, or learn about goats, and, you know, different types of agriculture that go on in town as well.
So we'll get moving with creating
The committee.
the charge in the committee and kind of working them a little parallel, and hopefully the charge will be ready, but in the meantime, we can just advertise for applications for general interest in being on the committee, and then once the charge is there, we can actually kind of revisit those that had
Right.
provided general interest and see if they're still committed to what we asked them to do.
But I'd say generally, yeah, Barry Events Committee.
Yeah, keep it general.
Right, and then
'Cause
each,
then they can
it'll be
choose
based
what committee
on,
they wanna be on.
as requested by the Board of Selectmen, specific events will be requested for whatever, and then we'll work out. It'll be almost like job tasks each
And
time. It's
when
like,
we talk
do
about
this,
the
please.
250th, and if we do want to do a big fair at Felton Field, then they need to be in touch with the Felton Field Committee and work with them to arrange that. Because I'm sure they have certain connections and functions they normally do down there, like doing a tractor pull or an oxen pull or horse show, things that might happen at the same time down there, that they already have that stuff readily available to line up. That would make it a lot easier to coordinate it.
Exactly.
And those contacts may help for other events as well.
All right,
Thank you.
you're welcome, and I think that'll do well for us.
I hope so.
Rural cable access, I'm going back up to start just getting through the rest of
Yep.
this stuff. I saw some pricing, I understand that certain areas are underserved, cost a lot to get there, but, of the areas listed, how many have we, or have we actually, let me rephrase this. How much of those roads have undeveloped parcels that people could move into if it was there, versus just right now, there's only 3 or 4 houses, you know what I mean? That's a question I have. Second is, we talked about, but I don't really know if we actually made any decisions on what to do. Identifying those underserved roads and actually mailing the people that live there to see what their thoughts are on. If it was brought down the street, would you actually use it?
The list or the roads that were brought up, I do have a map of every person who reached out to me to say, because once I put it out, put it out to the general public, saying we're looking for, the areas that are underserved. I have a map location of each person who reached out. I'd say that the highest percentage of the people that did were on the south side of Warren Road, and that was, that was kind of where this conversation had started, was with that area. You say some of the more real far out areas, I think Cole Place Road. There was a few houses there, but it was really kind of a long stretch to get there. So there was a number of vacant parcels in between.
Are the poles there? Just no cable on the poles?
The poles are there, and that's kind of where I have a pending question back to the person who provided the quotes to me, because a bulk of the pricing basically accounted the number of poles between where the
Service.
cable, where the service currently is, to where we kind of asked to the end of the road. And it was about $3,000 per pole on top of all the labor and costs. So I kind of asked for a little bit of clarification as to really what is that $3,000 for? Is that licensing? Is that because they have to upgrade the poles to fit the line?
Or are they planning on putting poles in, assuming there's none there?
Or is it just, we have to, it'd be $3,000 to put in a new pole, and this is exactly how far it would be, but it might be less if the space is there. So is that a real cost, or is that a, all things considered, if the worst case scenario is there, this is how much it would be?
As it is, it comes out to almost $16 a foot for cable they run, and almost $2,000 per door they're gonna hit.
What do you mean $2,000 per door?
They outlined 44 houses.
Oh, I
total
gotcha.
those will go
The
by,
number
so-
of existing
So
buildings
three
that.
$750,000 to run by 44 houses, and $15.72 per linear foot of cable they run. 100 feet between poles would be $1,500 of cable between poles, pole to pole, but.
You know, what I think what might be a good idea is that now that we have these prices, and I actually tried to get these prices a couple back last February or March, but it just kind of like sat on the back. They said, "Oh, we'll get back to you." And I think that person no longer works at Charter, because this person was very responsive to my requests. My thought is that the governor's new housing choice initiative that specifically targets low population areas, this seems to be something that was funded under that first round, was improving cable access to areas, and using that as an impetus of saying that's going to improve our ability to provide a better housing stock. And I think that they give up to $200,000 per community if you can prove the need.
Easier to sell a parcel to build on if you can say that there's still cable on the street when you show up, not it's gonna come someday, maybe.
Right. So I think that's where I was kind of looking at as far as a funding source, and identify what, of those, what's our priority, right, 1, 2, 3. And when that housing choice grant comes back up, putting in to say, this is what we want to do. And then maybe that turns into saying, well, the town of Barry's identified this need. Possibly there's other state funding that we can go for. Possibly there's the U.S. What was the other one? Community Connect program that we talked with. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the federal government, but agency. But there might be other avenues out there to tackle if we can at least get it out there that this is our priority, rather than just taking it and saying, well, we got to come up with $750,000 to get this done, so let's do a hell or high water.
Okay. One other thing, and I'm not saying it fits in with the timeline or the thought right now, but the idea of creating better buildable parcels. In other words, what would make somebody want to put a house there?
Right.
Is, you mentioned Cole Place.
Right.
Not a lot there now.
Mm-hmm.
But part of that is because there's a road that's not a road. And if you put in a road, all of a sudden it might connect that southwest corner of Barry more directly to Barry Center or South Street. If you could, otherwise you come down south and then you go up Chamberlain, and then you're pretty much circling all the way around Walnut or Root Road to make your way back.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking Cole Road or Cole Place Road in that area, and what I'm trying to get back to is the whole Mass Works, we've talked about that. If we get some things with cable, we get some things where we want to put in a road, and we got some people saying, I'll develop that parcel if this is a road, a public road, paved, it's got cable, it's got that's where you get the Mass Works grant, because you get private investment committed with you. So you're saying, we're going to do this, this, and this, and they're going to do this, this, and this. Here's my grant. And then all of a sudden they go, you got a plan. It's going to make a difference. And they'll give you the money.
When we talk about development, obviously, most of our tax base comes from residential home taxes. I don't know if we've thought about maybe a senior complex in town, bigger than we have already. Like if you think in the center of Holden, they have a very large building. if you had something that was like a condo unit, you might have 100 units in it. And by going with, you know, a 50-plus community building, you're not likely to add to the student base of school. So we're not gonna be upping our contributing factors to the school, but we would be drawing 100 new units of you know, excise tax, property tax to the town. 100 new units bringing in
As long as
tax,
it's not a nonprofit that builds it.
well, once they're owned by,
Just-
once they're, I know, the building is part of it, but I mean, but once they're owned, the recurring tax revenues from 100 units, you know, let's say there was $1,800 of tax a year, you know, it's $180,000, it's almost $250,000. That might knock a few points off our tax levy across the board. That's something that's good for the town.
One
And
thing
we certainly have land, you know, and, but yes, making these places usable by, you know, maybe expanding water and sewer in the future and definitely getting cable out there, this helps with things like that.
Well, one thing on that end, on the senior center note, I have been in discussions with Eileen Clarkson about, and we went to a seminar a couple weeks ago on this, and afterward we were really on the same page. Is that part of her goals for the next year is to basically seek an age-friendly designation from the AARP for the town of Barry.
What's that mean?
So basically, it's a commitment to best practices that your town will do things to make aging in your community recognized as being the best, you know, the best practices. So doing things that make it that
Senior friendly.
senior friendly. Yeah, it's really senior friendly, but they call it age friendly. So it's all, you know, it's beneficial for all ages, that you get it, that you, when you're in your house, it's livable for your entire life rather than just.
That's like tax deferments programs I talked about before, when you
Right.
freeze someone's taxes in
Right.
the house.
So
This
there's,
is not necessarily.
Yeah, you're just letting them defer tax payment until
When they're
the
ready to
house-
sell the house because they're gonna
Right.
die, they'll
Or,
pay off
or,
the
or
debt
they
of
find
life.
or they find they're gonna move to a senior center or assisted
Oh, I
living or
get it.
something. At that point, then they square up the tax levy, but it allows them to stay in their property and not decide if they're gonna buy meds this month or pay their extra taxes in the house. As costs go up every year and their income is fixed. I talked about this a year ago.
So
you
that
guys
policy
recall.
would support the concept of being
Right, and-
age
but
friendly.
there's a
You
number-
recall, we talked about this a year ago, and the finance committee went, whoa, wait, but it's, you know.
there's a ton of best practices stuff under this, you know, especially like the connectivity of things and making sure that, you know, people in their houses can actually get to the services that they need. So
Mhm.
it's really something that we're gonna focus on and try to implement. But I think that kind of dovetails onto that whole looking
Yep.
at what our senior housing stock is and how we can improve that, because that's a big initiative under the Baker administration, is age friendliness and trying to make sure that communities are putting in these best practices.
And if we did develop something like that, if someone did put up 100 units, then suddenly there's groceries and there's stuff, all the town stores are gonna see an increase in sales.
I just wanna get back onto the rural cable
Sorry,
access.
sorry.
No, I got you. It was,
But kind of.
it was good conversation, but I just wanna get back to that right now, because one of the things I don't recall if I asked you to ask, don't recall how it all lined up, because I remember there was hints at. Does this include any of the concept of moving the fiber down South Street and South Berry Road, kind of trying to extend it down? Or is that something you think we should ask,
So
we can roll it into
This
a
was
bigger
cable.
picture?
I kind of.
It's all the same company.
I really think that there already is that access to fiber on Southbury Road.
But how far down?
It looks like it went right to the center. I was trying to track it just by.
You mean all the way down past Wildwood Reload, all the way up to the common?
Yeah, I mean, if you drive down there, it looks like it banks off one that goes toward 122 and one that goes toward 32. And I think it goes to 67 and stops somewhere around there. But you'll see it's that.
So it
third-
might make it all the way down to 67.
Right.
So we just gotta go down Wheelwright to get to DPW, which is shorter than going from the high school all the way down South Street.
Could be there, yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to
Right,
figure
right.
out, because I know that we talked about trying to connect the municipal buildings on fiber would make a big difference for us. But I also thought, if we can identify where fiber is, when I've heard talk about it, the planning board to review the current zoning map, knowing that we've got to expand some of the commercial opportunities. Somehow they gotta figure out to do that, but we need to be able to say, where's fiber? Because that's gonna be more important than just cable.
Part of that master plan to be announced.
I guess the
But that's where I
Right,
want
right.
us doing our part of, where do we think we should make sure it's at? Because I'm still, even though I understand that some of those are a high ratio of cost to the actual number of homes served at the moment,
There's a lot of
I
lots out there.
think we gotta look at the bigger picture and say, the town needs it. So, where I wanna go, and again, I know it's asking a lot in the next few months. I would like to have numbers to say, is this worth putting into the capital plan / warrant process for the annual town meeting to do it all or do a portion of this to take those first steps?
I think my personal opinion, just looking at kind of where our finances are, I think that if we get to the point where we're able to take a portion of funding and putting it into its own stabilization account toward this, as far as raise and appropriate and put it in, that's not going directly toward operations or our current backlog of
A
capital.
capital-specific stabilization fund?
Like a specific stabilization fund, whether it be, even if we're being able to afford it as a, capital improvement stabilization, we were able to take $100,000 and put it toward that, and let that build up over time before expending any of it. I think then we might be in a better position, but I think right now, with funding basically our capital needs, not through our budget or through the operating budget, but basically other than long-term debt, it's hard to kind of make that justification of that investment without first looking to see what our grant opportunities are.
But that's where, what I think we gotta do is we gotta look at that and say, this is how much we're able to. Because if we can do that, then we can tell the people we're asking for grant that this is how much we can invest. Can you put in a quarter? Can they put in a quarter? And all of a sudden,
Right, yeah, that's what I'm thinking, like, if you could put some of this stabilization, or into its own separate stabilization account for that purpose, because then that becomes the pot of money identified as, all right, if we did do that, that's our matching funds. But I think that we need to kind of get on track with trying to follow best practices with not expending all of our free cash. Trying to keep amount of money in that free cash pool that revolves, so that way, if we do run into a situation where we do get free cash or some free cash withheld, we're not going under zero and hitting our stabilization balance, because we do have a good healthy stabilization balance at 5%. I just like to see that free cash number build a little bit more before we really do more heavy investments.
I would, and there's another thing I would like us to consider. I'm not saying when, or if it can happen right away, but it probably requires a little legal input. I've heard that also because even though cable's on the street, if your house is 1,000 yards away from the street, it's gonna cost you $3,000 to tie in. So you don't get just free hookup if you're more than 100 feet from the pole or something. After that, they start charging you as if from the pole, not from 100 feet from the pole. Boom, so they're charging you.
But on your own property, you could have a private vendor come run cable for you down there, and they'd have to connect it. So you could get it run privately for probably cheaper money down your own poles in your driveway.
You could, but I'm just curious how many people, if the concept was this, okay, hey, I could do this, I just can't cover the cost all in one shot. But the town said, you know what we can do is we can cover the cost and recoup betterment charges every quarter in your tax bill. So if it was gonna cost you $3,000, you're just paying $250 a quarter, and in 3 years you pay the town back. And I know, factor in some interest or whatever you think means, so we're not abusing the town people that are fronting it. But the concept is it allows people to hook up then, not 3 years from now as they put it in a savings and hope it builds up, and then in 3 years it costs more
betterment's
because
leanable.
labor rates are more and whatever.
The betterment's lienable if they sell the property at default on it. It's lienable against the title.
So I just think that's something to consider, are these possibilities and how many people might be interested in. You know what, I would do that because it means I'm not having to figure out how to get a loan when my personal credit's in an issue. But again, betterment, tax lien, we're not risking because.
I have two comments on this so far. One would be, most of these houses have telephone poles and telephones available. Doesn't Verizon offer a DSL service through a phone line?
Some people do have that,
can't-
but they've
can't-
identified that they're not happy with the service and asked if there's anything that they can,
I was gonna
we can
say,
do
I
to
had
get
that.
cable.
And I might as well not have had internet.
It's certainly.
My cell phone signal was faster than my Wi-Fi in my
I
house.
upgraded as well, but I'm saying, so there is some access they can get at least, which is better than nothing, but not, I know, not great. I went from that Verizon to the Comcast because, to the Charter, I mean, because it was much faster. But at least some saving graces, there is something they can get, they're not without. I lived with the other for years. I lived with the other for like 6 years. It wasn't that bad, or 8 years. It wasn't so bad I couldn't do it, but I had so many people on it that I couldn't do it anymore. And the second thought is, at $83,000 a mile average for this wire, the cost per mile, depending on the road, is astronomically different. As low as I think $49,000 on one to $160,000 a mile on another. That disparage in cost per mile seems ludicrous. They all say aerial, the pole should be there in all these places in advance. I don't know why there's such a big disproportionate price per mile, depending what road they're on. And I still think that if we reach out to private contractors, that means this is 9 miles of cable. I would think a contractor can run a mile in a couple of days.
But it's hard.
But
It's hard to get a private contractor involved because.
But if someone can run a couple mile and a couple, we'll let the difficulty aside for now.
Okay.
If somebody could factually run, in a week, run a mile, then we're talking 9 weeks of work for $750,000.
You can run a mile of cable in 4 days, 3 days, easy.
I would
in a
expect
bucket
that-
puck
that-
and
that's
a
what I
real
said.
truck.
So if you give it
as
a
long
week-
as you're on the road.
I believe-
Lowering is you're going through. If I recall, when you're going down South Street and then you got to take a left onto Loring and then
Yeah.
drop down the hill,
No, it's still,
the cable, I think, isn't following the road. It's skipping that triangle of land. Is their proposal to get to that area, I think, or something. There
Well,
was,
that's just the
there's
way
a
that the
jump
poles
or
cur-
something.
The way the poles currently run, it actually runs.
National Grid's
Yeah.
power runs.
Yeah, the power lines run like almost
But-
right in front of a couple of houses.
but still, those poles go to place, they have access to trucks to put the poles in the first place and run it, and they can still get to it.
I don't disagree. I'm just trying to.
I'm just saying, we really should make a concerted effort to talk to private vendors for running wires. And once again, I don't know the legality of the rights to attach to the pole, if that's between National Grid and Verizon that own these poles, if there's a fee to pay to attach, or if we're allowed to have a company come run it, if there's a standing, that's the licensing side we'd have to look into before
There's a
doing
lot to
something.
that.
But I would really think it's possible to find a private contractor that could run the bulk of this for a lot lower cost than they're quoting us. That seems to me like a lot of money for 9 miles of cable.
It's worth asking, because it might just be that's the quote they have because the vendor they use to do it is giving them that quote. But I don't know.
And it may be they're assuming that they've just assumed there's nothing there and they're laying all new poles. I mean, the poles are probably $1,000 or $1,500 a pole to put a pole in the ground.
Well, the CASO said it was $3,000 per pole. That, it didn't identify what that $3,000 really was. It was kind of manually entered as a $3,000 per pole. I think site readiness was the term that they used on it.
Yeah, we
So
got
that's where I think
100
we
feet.
really need to get the clarification on is what is that? Is that a new pole because you need to put a new pole in, or is that like, worst case scenario, we show up, we gotta replace the pole? So, and if we had to replace all the poles, here's what the cost would be. So I'm still waiting on that answer. That could dramatically change the.
There are about 500 poles involved in this total.
I mean, it's 75% of the total cost is in that one
But that's
line.
also where the grant and the rural funding mechanism was brought up, is because of that.
Yeah.
A lot of the old power, especially in the rural, you had a 16-foot pole, they put the power at the top, and now you have all these regulations saying that phone's gotta be 10 feet below that, cable's gotta be 2 feet below that. All of a sudden, cable's at eye level. They're like, we can't install it without replacing all the poles, and that's when the state finally listened to everybody saying, you gotta help us.
Right, it's a, yeah, $3,000,
Hopefully,
it's
they're still
$1,000 to
actually
put the
gonna help
pole
us.
in, then they gotta pay the $2,000 to National Grid and Verizon to come out and move their lines up onto the new pole. Verizon's gotta pull the old pole out of the ground after they get their lines off, so. I mean, does that, whether or not that yet has to happen for all of them, I don't know. And I'll ask her whether or not that was assuming that they have to do that to all of them, or if they identified, yes, we're going to have to replace those poles if cable's gonna go on those.
It's a little more
You know
discovery.
what we do is we tell them, you know what? We'll give you an easement to put your own pole in anywhere in this town you want. Opposite side of the power and phone lines, I don't care. Now you don't have to worry about your license agreement with National Grid.
Yeah, that's certainly doable. Then there's certain cost
And
per
they'd
pole
say,
that
that
may be
sounds
less.
great, but we're not gonna do that because it's gonna screw up our agreement in every other town we have.
You almost wish we had another negotiation coming up, then we could throw this in here.
Well,
Unfortunately, we don't.
That's finally something we can discuss on it and some headway, and I think it certainly warrants a little further research in a couple of areas. It just seems like to me a high number for the distance we're going, but I think this is clearly, even at this number, we could find a way to get that done. I'd rather see the number come down a lot before we do, and if we see grant money to, if that number drops to 450 and we get 200 in grant money, now we're looking at funding 250, we can find that and get this done and finally have everyone have cable service in this town. And not to mention, all the empty lots now left in town, to this point, would have cable available to them, which would make these lots
I think it
more
would help a
buildable.
lot. It'd make
I do
it so
too.
people aren't looking to put every brand-new house right on Southbury Road or South Street, because they feel more comfortable being able to reach out into some of the other neighborhoods that haven't really
The one question I haven't asked them yet is, okay, now that we have the number, how much are you guys willing to help us with this? I haven't asked that question yet, so.
Okay.
Right, and that's the thing, how much of this cost do we need to pick up to get you guys to do it soon?
Right.
And that may be the best way to pitch it. They might say, hey, if you guys match it 50-50, we'll do it. Or if you guys would pay a third, they might come that low, and geez, you get a grant money and to take up a bunch of that, and it's something we could fund.
So,
Still on.
so that's what we want to do. We want to look at potential alternate pricing and grant opportunities.
And this is good timing to have that
And
come
then
in.
start to try to bring it all together and say, option A, option B.
Okay.
Because when I brought the PEG access money up on town floor, obviously that's what they asked about, was getting new services run and new cables, so I'm glad, well-timed bringing this up, because we did promise, and I did promise on the floor that we were discussing it still. So, people can see that is the case.
Next item is approval of annual license renewals. Is this just alcohol, or is
No,
this everything?
So this is everything, it's primarily the alcohol licenses, because those are the ones that were due November 30th. But I also included all of the licenses that I have received to this point, so that way they can be issued without lapse.
Okay.
It's probably 70% of all the licenses, because anybody that does still have a due date of December 30th has till that date. to
Thank you,
submit.
ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thank you, sir.
I
Have a
enjoyed
good night.
I enjoyed understanding a little bit more. Thank you.
Take care. So, any questions on that, or do we have a motion? What's the thought?
Just glance and through them quick.
We verified there's no back taxes or any of those type of issues.
Correct, there was one that was identified, but I had emailed and that one's been resolved.
Okay.
Automatic amusement license?
Basically, video screens.
Video games and
Where's
bells
that?
and whistles arcade type.
Where's
Not
that?
even, if you
Stetson
use it,
Road?
that'd be,
Oh, that's,
upper deck.
yeah, upper deck. Look at the video games in the basement or the jukebox or something,
Gotcha.
I'm guessing.
That type of
Yeah,
stuff,
jukebox, pool table, or even, or TV, if you have a TV running all the time. That
Okay.
counts too, cause I know Northeast Pizza and,
Oh, those Keno.
not even the Keno, even just like if you have the TV on for, if you're gonna sit down, eat, watch TV, it's considered automatic amusement if you got the TV going.
Wow.
There ought to be a lot more of those in here then.
Yeah. It's enforcement too, so.
Report that to your zoning enforcement official,
Because
and
if-
you might be able to get
if
yourself
that's the
another
case-
license fee.
If that's the case, I think you
Or
can watch
business that
TV at
leaves
Young
town.
Garden, you can probably watch it at the
It's
bar.
one or
at
the other.
Mill, you can watch it. I don't think Picasso's has anything up to that, I haven't been in there in a while. But most places are running a TV.
I wonder if we can do the whole sheet at once.
Why not?
I guess we can if we can make reference to what that sheet really is.
Well, yeah, that would be kind of difficult.
You can't just say the sheet presented to us.
I guess we can, we just all have to sign
I was
one
gonna
of the
say if-
sheets saying this is the one we referred to based on the vote of such and such a day.
I have all the.
And then there's,
You guys have to sign these too, by the way.
and we can sign all those next week.
In October, we're signing them tonight.
Meeting minutes?
Yes.
It's his job.
Oh, yes, it does.
For a couple months anyway. It won't last very long, Greg, and then you'll be able to throw them in my lap or something, and be like, sign these, Matt.
Why don't we call this
Talking all the-
appendix,
think if we just
appendix
sign it
A,
and date it.
sign it, yeah.
You took 'em
Appendix
all.
A, signed and dated by the select board.
Sure. You guys still have to sign all the
Date.
licenses, so.
Yeah, but then we can
We
do
have to
that.
do those too.
Yeah, but if
Before the
we,
end of the year.
When's that gonna be done? Just by the end of the year?
Yeah.
That way we just timing ourselves to get in. How long do you,
But
like,
if we-
once we sign, do you have a certain amount of time to get to the next person?
See, at least now they don't require that these be,
Last time this happened, we were already 2 months late.
Really? Oh, no, not half.
not these, it was all the other ones, the retail.
I mean, the ones we actually signed. Did we actually
Oh, okay.
sign before the end of the year? I think it slipped a little, but nobody got mad because we weren't enforcing it not being hung, because we didn't give it to them. In other words, they were legal
Actually, you know what?
electronically, they just didn't have the thing to hang on the, I
Right.
thought.
Um,
Except alcohol,
I
that's gotta
revised-
go to the state.
Right. Sign these at your own,
We were a
at your
little-
own leisure. Well, they actually, so, it was funny, last year they enacted this new process where it was like, all right, you're gonna go in and you're gonna click on the ones that didn't renew,
Oh,
and
no.
then we're gonna go in, we're gonna
Well,
resolve
yeah,
it
that too,
through it,
but
and it was like
that's not
this
what I
big
meant.
cluster, like, all right, what is the state doing? Well, this year, it went back to the old system, where it's just, here, get this, the signed copy, and mail it in to us. And they took out the line in here for the Board of Selectmen to sign off here, so you could just send it right in. So you really only have to sign this. And after this vote, now you've attested to that, I'm gonna click a box, and they're gonna get an electronic one with your digital signature on it. So this one is for,
Okay.
this one, so we'll have the hard copy with your signature, but they'll have a secondary copy as proof of
Which one goes to
issuance.
the, permit holder?
The permit holder would be,
Is it an electronic or something issued by the
They-
state?
no, they get the local one. So
Okay.
you're the one with your signature on it. They don't get anything from the state.
Okay.
The state really gets involved for the initial licensing, or if there's a compliance issue.
Okay. So you're writing it up and we'll just.
I'd make a
each initial
motion
it?
that we approve all of the license listed on License Index 1 dated 12/17/2018.
There you go.
Second.
Call for a vote.
Aye,
Aye.
Aye.
and we can sign that.
Actually, now that you labeled it, just by meeting minutes alone, it's been referenced. License index 1, 12/17/2018.
Think that.
Notarized by the clerk, look at that. Should I attest?
And then when we sit in his office for the next 2 hours signing those, we'll sign it.
We'll make coffee.
We'll- Right, but we've got, figure that's something we'll
Uh-oh.
get to at our own leisure when we all have time to fit it in.
I just made a mistake here. What date did we approve these minutes?
You,
Today.
today.
Oh, these are the ones we approved today,
Those are
okay.
the ones you took home to review. from
Okay,
the
we
last
approved today,
meeting.
okay.
And we just voted today to approve them.
I just signed approve today, I'm like, uh-oh, and signing them
No,
today.
it
I
is
thought-
today you are approving.
Okay.
yeah.
I thought you were saying these were older ones we didn't get to.
Well,
No,
they-
no. Okay.
I got you.
No, that's good, that's,
The
that's,
past meetings, but
that's
they haven't been
fantastic.
Right. The official vote to approve was today on
Today,
those.
yeah.
Gotcha. All right, so we did that. Discharge of mortgage, 670 Wheelwright Road. Is this another one of those
Yeah.
That-
CDBG grant things that expired its time and
I
They-
did provide it to legal counsel, he reviewed it, checked it, he said everything seemed to be in line, so just needed your signature for approval. Or your vote and signature.
make a motion to accept the discharge of mortgage for 670 Wheelwright Road based on the recommendation of the town administrator, who is saying it's based on a recommendation of legal counsel.
Second.
Call for vote.
Aye.
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 There you go. I just need a signature for everybody on that.
This is the discharge thing. The mortgage discharge, you need the signature on.
And a pen here.
Wage authorization for Zachary Matarosian, Sergeant. He's starting at the first step as Sergeant.
Well, there's
The
only
only
one
place
step
we sign.
now.
Oh, it's a percentage over the patrolman thing. Sorry, go ahead.
That's the only place we sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess. We are at the ceremony where he was appointed sergeant to replace Sergeant Ricos, who's moving to Paxton. So do we have a motion to accept the wage authorization for Zachary Matarosian, Sergeant?
So moved.
Second.
Call for vote.
Aye.
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 Just sign that.
You need to sign that if you don't mind and give it to Andrew when you're done. Vote to upgrade voting equipment. Per a letter received in our packet, the town's vote to appropriate the money to buy the equipment does not work without also having the Board of Selectmen vote to change from an older voting equipment to a new voting equipment. So it requires a special vote by the Board of Selectmen to actually change it, and in here somewhere you wrote the words for the motion, right?
Yep.
Here, put that in this other pile of things to read. So I will make a motion. I move to authorize the town of Barry to start using the ImageCast voting system and discontinue the use of the AccuVote voting system.
Second the motion.
Second.
Call for vote.
Aye.
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 What is this? I don't see this in the agenda.
That is a notice more than action necessary, if I'm correct. That is just, somebody entered a 61B and they need to tell the world that this is my tree cutting plan.
How
Yes.
far up is
Yeah.
that? What number is your house, out of curiosity? This is 985.
Yeah, that's much further up the hill. I'm trying to remember,
It's about a mile and 3/4 up.
see,
total, so
yeah,
it's
I'm
gonna
at
be-
330,
So.
so it's two-thirds. Yeah.
Twice again, yeah. So it's gotta be up in the ballpark of, very just short of Gilbert, maybe?
Hmm.
That block
Yeah,
of
that
woods out
rings a
there.
bell. That long driveway back that way.
A lot of trees come out that side of the road on both sides of Williams over the last couple of years.
I don't remember. I looked it up the other day, and now I can't. 985?
985.
See if this thing does things. This machine.
See, I've already bought all my cordwood for the year. See, it's always nice when they cut up the street, because they'll deliver it cheaper, they don't have to go anywhere with it. You know?
Oh,
So I've already bought 16 cords. Stick a fork in me, I'm done.
Are we all done?
The only thing left would be if you guys or the town administrator had,
I just have one thing to add under correspondence. I just had
past flares.
somebody that owns a property on
Close.
Sanderson Road,
Further up than it was
um,
before, but I'm saying.
basically approached me and asked whether or not the town had any interest in purchasing the the property that he's trying to sell. It's a landlocked piece of property. He said that the abutter, he has Stevens Farm on one side, and I guess the Conservation Commission owns property to the other side. I did advise him that he may want to touch base with Conservation to see whether or not they had any interest in it, but I didn't think that the town had interest in making any sort of offer on the property itself without it coming from Conservation for a petition.
What place was this?
I have, here's the parcel location, or the parcel information. That's the sales solicitation that he dropped off in the office just to say, hey, I don't know if the town's interested. If there is interest, maybe we can discuss that in an executive session.
All right. This almost looks like it could be a.
So those can be signed really anytime?
Yeah,
since you're gonna
yeah,
be
I'll just
on
have them
property.
in.
Can I do it over next weekend?
Yeah,
Or try to do it
yeah,
during
that's
the
fine.
week?
We'll put it up in the office
I
when we
might
get a
pick it,
chance.
I might pick it, I do it.
Okay.
We'll see.
It's up off Pleasant Street. What's it identified though by address? A. Sanderson Road? That-
I'd have to look
Back to the
parcel
reason why it's
ID.
landlocked, like it's not really on a road, so.
Right, it's kind of like.
Is Sanderson the one that goes down to the wells?
Yeah. Because it's the I guess it's the well head property on one side, and then the
Reservoir on the other, and
yeah,
and
the
then-
or the Stevens Farms owns up
Yeah.
to the other side, and it's just kind of landlocked.
Yeah, they own right up to the reservoir there.
Hmm.
Talk to conservation and take it to the DPW commission too, see if there's any benefit to that near the wells and stuff. I don't know.
I didn't know we had a well up that way. Thought all our wells were down in Southbury, Berry Plains area.
Now, if you go down Sanderson down there, the well's off, the tower's off, tank's off on the right. There
Okay.
used to be the reservoir on the left, which we don't
With the
use.
old reservoir, the.
Yeah, we don't use and won't use, but it's still officially listed, so.
Okay.
But the tank is filled off a well and a pump, which is down there on the right-hand side.
I don't know, I guess also maybe checking with the water department, I guess, if they think owning that
Yeah.
land here, there is a benefit to them.
Maybe for future use for another storage tank or whatever, I mean.
Right.
Just the thought, if it's in that proximity and we've already got stuff down there, maybe it's beneficial.
What is this? I just was talking about that. Pulled it out and sent to me, but as a chairman, so I wanna make sure I don't not mention something that came from this Keegan Whirlin LLC.
Fun, I'll take it out of airplane mode. In just a minute, we'll start hearing buzz and beep when I get on my, see what I've missed in the last couple hours. Takes a couple minutes, all of a sudden it's going beep, beep, boop, boop, beep.
There it is.
Yeah. That's one, 2 texts. That's not bad, 2 text messages.
Maximum this weekend, every once in a while, it's like, oh, it's tweaked. I gotta figure it out.
You guys have a copy of, or those 2 copies of the contract with the chief?
Okay, that's what that was.
They went down that way.
Okay.
Didn't come back.
This is the national.
Sadie, do you have the copies of the contract with the chief?
Department of Public
Do
Utilities
you have the
saying
copies of the
National Grid
contract with the
and
chief?
et cetera is asking
Chief's
for more
labor
money, so
contract.
here's the public hearings. Oh, could you,
Actually, no, I don't.
you know what?
You guys just check your stuff,
Charlie,
make sure you
do
don't
you
have the
have it?
originals.
No, you
Can
gotta-
you take
you
this
gotta-
and post it on the website and maybe on Facebook just to get it out there?
I think I did post this.
Okay. Well, I got a letter to me. You may have done it, but I just want to make sure it's out there or a reminder. Because I remember seeing something through email, and you must have done that.
Yeah.
But now that we've received the letter, we can just do it one more time. Other than that, make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second?
Call for vote.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, and have a nice holiday.
Way back.
Mhm.